Chapter 12:12. Using the mind to control matter and energy, no matter what it is, as long as I can understand it and have a strong enough mind, I can create it out of thin air. Standing in the white world, Zhang Cheng kept manipulating his mind to create all kinds of gadgets. Among them were special technological items that could only be processed by an extremely high level of civilization in the material world, as well as living animals and plants. However, there was no exception. Maintaining these things required a lot of mental energy, and the more complicated and precise the item, the greater the mental energy consumption. When a mental energy was exhausted, they would all disappear permanently. Even living creatures could not be preserved. It was obvious that the universe of the mind could not truly create life out of thin air. To be precise, it could not create souls. He even suspected that every life form that lived here had transmigrated from the connecting point of the two universes. Otherwise, how could he explain the strange phenomenon of not being able to create souls here? Just as he was about to carry out more detailed experiments, he suddenly realized that the white scenery around him had been replaced by an impenetrable primitive forest. Moreover, the trunks of every tree were densely carved with unknown, mysterious symbols that flashed with brilliance from time to time. Ah, it seems like we have a guest. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and showed an interested expression. Through the test just now, he had learned that everything in the spiritual world was produced by the combination of subjective imagination and spiritual power. Neither of the two could be missing, or else nothing could be created and the primordial state would be maintained. Therefore, when the surrounding scenery changed, or when something broke the tranquil whiteness, it meant that another creature was approaching. As expected, about a few minutes later, a ferocious beast that looked like a combination of a bear and a lion slowly walked out from the depths of the dense forest. It had golden fur, and its eyes revealed a hungry green light. It opened its mouth full of sharp teeth, and saliva constantly dripped from it as it looked around. Even from afar, one could feel the intense hunger. There was no doubt that this was an extremely hungry beast, a dangerous hunter. When it saw Zhang Cheng appear on the horizon, it suddenly roared. Roar! The next second, this big guy began to run wildly, as if it had gone mad, knocking down all the trees along the way. Every time a tree fell, a mysterious symbol would appear on its fur. This is... Zhang Cheng's eyes glowed slightly. He didn't panic at all because a dangerous enemy was approaching. Instead, he was filled with intense curiosity. As someone who had studied and used psionic powers, he had some understanding of the power of the mind. In particular, this forest that had been created out of thin air was obviously related to the bear monster. It could even be said that the forest was part of its ability. The runes on the tree trunks were not just decorations, but a stored power. This big guy would strike trees with different runes according to its needs and obtain a corresponding increase in power. Some of them increased speed, while others increased strength and physique. By the time it got close, its body was already 6 times its original size. Its hair was like burning flames, emitting a shocking amount of heat. I'm sorry, but I don't have the habit of becoming other people's food. Due to the fact that he did not understand the power comparison in the spiritual world for the time being, Zhang Cheng decisively chose to retreat instead of rashly confronting an unfamiliar opponent head-on. Less than half a second after he left, the bear monster pounced on him, making a deafening sound as it collided with the ground. Boom! In an instant, countless matter and energy created by the mind splattered in all directions. There was even a huge pit with a diameter of over 100 meters on the ground. If this was the physical universe, such destructive power wouldn't even be enough to make Zhang Cheng lift his eyelids. However, in the spiritual world, he couldn't even achieve 1/10 of this level of destructive power, so he instantly became extremely vigilant. Roar! The bear monster realized that it had missed its target and immediately let out a threatening roar. Its eyes flickered with hunger. Are you angry? No, you're emotional. Can you understand what I'm saying? Can we communicate with each other? Zhang Cheng, who had entered a research state, was undoubtedly the most terrifying kind of person. Not only was he not afraid, But he became extremely fanatical and even wanted to talk to this monster that was trying to eat him. "Your food," a vague and jerky voice echoed in his mind. "I'm food? What about you? What are you?" Zhang Cheng pointed at his nose with interest. It was obvious that this voice was transmitted by the bear monster through a spiritual connection or spiritual power. Although it was very primitive and monotonous, it also proved that it wasn't without intelligence. It was just not smart enough. Hunter, hungry, let me eat you." The bear monster transmitted some information intermittently. At the same time, it didn't stop attacking again and again. However, its attack method was too primitive. It tried to fight force with force and use absolute power to overwhelm the enemy. It didn't have any advantage against someone like Zhang Cheng, who was good at using skills and strategies. After testing repeatedly for a while, Zhang Cheng finally gave up on his original plan after realizing that this bear monster couldn't carry out too complicated communication. He condensed a spear made of spiritual power and stabbed it into the bear monster's body again and again. During this process, he could feel a large amount of spiritual power gushing out of the bear monster's body with the attack. He could then plunder this spiritual power. Not long after, the enormous bear monster began to be unable to hold on. Not only was the coverage of the dense forest getting smaller and smaller, but its body was also shrinking. In the end, it became a bear cub that was only the size of a pillow. Oh, whoa. Looking at this furry little guy that raised its head and howled at him, Zhang Cheng suddenly had a very absurd feeling. He bent down and lifted it up by its neck. He smiled and teased. "Since you're so cute, I won't kill you. How about it? Are you interested in being my pet? I promise I'll feed you the best food. Don't kill. I'm willing." The little bear monster quickly expressed its intention. After all, it hadn't lived enough and didn't want to die at all. Chapter 12:13. There was no doubt that things like dignity and freedom were complex issues that would only be considered when the most basic survival requirements were met. Before that, food, water, and safety were the most urgent needs of every life, and they were willing to pay any price for them. As for the spirit of, "I would rather die than kneel down," or "I would rather die standing than live on my knees," it would never appear on the lowest level of people who couldn't even fill their stomachs. It was also not like some ridiculous animal protection organization members who thought that animals also had dignity and animals also yearned for freedom. On the contrary, as long as there was enough food and a relatively comfortable living environment, most animals didn't care if they were kept in captivity as exhibits for tourists. They would rather stay in the zoo and slowly lose their wildness than return to the wild to participate in the cruel competition and elimination. As a bear monster that was still in a relatively primitive state, it could even be said to be a beast. Naturally, it was no exception. After trying to get along for a while, it found that its strange master not only had no intention of killing it, but also allowed it to devour a little bit of mental energy every time it defeated an opponent. Although this bit of mental energy was no different from leftovers, it was enough to meet its daily needs. As the number of times it devoured increased, its strength also recovered little by little. Over time, it began to feel that this state seemed to be not bad. At least it was much safer than hunting alone. Looking at this pet that was already half the height of a human, Zhang Cheng suddenly stopped and asked, "How far is it from the place you mentioned last time?" "It should be there soon," the bear monster quickly replied. "But if I remember correctly, that's what you said 40 hours ago. Could it be that in your concept of the word soon is different from my understanding of it?" Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows and questioned. Because this world was completely white, there was nothing at all that could be used as a reference. So from the beginning, he only made a tool to calculate time and distance. Although strictly speaking, it didn't mean much. It was one of the few data that could be used as a reference. "Sorry, master, before you taught me, I didn't have a clear concept of distance. In short, the places we can reach before we feel hungry are all relatively close." The bear monster raised its head and carefully explained. "So, almost there could be a few minutes, a dozen minutes, or a few hours, dozens of hours, or even hundreds of hours." Zhang Cheng frowned subconsciously. According to the rules of this world, All creatures would start to feel hungry after their mental strength had been depleted to a certain extent. They would need to find prey to replenish themselves. If it was not replenished within a certain period of time, the feeling of hunger would gradually disappear. At the same time, the upper limit of the total amount of spirit would also drop by one level. In other words, there were only two ways to survive in this world. One was to continuously plunder to become stronger, while the other was to slowly exhaust one's mental power and eventually disappear forever. According to the bear monster's mental capacity, if it ate once, it wouldn't feel hungry for more than half a month. Walking continuously in this boundless white world for more than half a month? To all life forms from the material universe, this was a kind of pain and torment. In fact, these days, if Zhang Cheng hadn't discovered some interesting phenomena and encountered some incredible life forms, he would have been bored to death long ago. Just as he was hesitating whether to change his route and change to a place that was easier to reach, a large number of thorny vines suddenly grew out of the white world around him. Seeing this scene, the bear monster immediately curled up into a ball and hid in a corner as if it had met its natural enemy, trembling in fear. It's here. Who is it? It was Zhang Cheng's first time seeing his pets so timid. Even the thought of running away and resisting had completely disappeared. There was only one reaction left, and that was fear, a fear that came from the depths of its heart. It's an overlord, an existence that is undefeatable. There was nothing that could compete with it. Hide, or else you'll die. The bear monster's voice was trembling, and it took a lot of effort to finish its words. Overlord? Undefeatable? Zhang Cheng's curiosity was undoubtedly piqued. He narrowed his eyes and looked around, trying to find the life form that created all this. Unfortunately, even if he tried his best to expand his spiritual power, he couldn't find a single living thing around him. What was even more frightening was that this thorny forest seemed to have no end, and the area it covered was far beyond imagination. After a full 10 minutes, a behemoth appeared on the horizon. It was like a small mountain, and when it ran, it caused the ground around it to tremble violently, as if there was an earthquake. This is an overlord? Zhang Cheng's pupils suddenly shrank. In the spiritual world, the most direct thing that reflected a creature's strength was its size. Usually, the bigger the creature, the stronger its spiritual power, and the smaller the creature, the weaker it was. A creature with such a huge body definitely had a spiritual power that surpassed some kind of limit. It was not something he could fight against now. So that's how it is. This is an overlord. Zhang Cheng licked his lips out of habit and tried to hide himself behind the huge thorny vines as much as possible. At the same time, he quickly contracted his spiritual power. In the spiritual world, he was now as inconspicuous as a stone on the side of the road. However, in the next second, he was stunned by what he saw in front of him. He saw that the huge creature that was like a mountain was smashed into pieces by a black that was so small that it was almost negligible. Even if they were very far apart, he could still feel the abundant spiritual power floating around, and it was like a tidal wave that constantly attacked everything. This is a real overlord, the bear monster's trembling voice echoed in Zhang Cheng's ears. It made Zhang Cheng wonder if the experience he had gained from his observations over the past few days was wrong, or if it was just a superficial phenomenon, and there was something more complicated hidden under the surface. An overlord? What exactly is that? He frowned and muttered to himself. It seemed like he was asking the bear monster, but it also seemed like he was asking himself. However, the bear monster thought that the question was directed at itself. It quickly replied, "The overlords are the oldest and most powerful hunters. They are the supreme rulers. Nothing can go against their will. In their eyes, other than each other, everything else is food that can be taken at any time." Chapter 12:14. The existence of the overlord caused Zhang Cheng to fall into a strong contradiction and self-doubt for a long time. This was because this kind of life form in an absolute dominant position did not conform to the universal law of the spiritual world at all. It could even be said that their existence was to prove that there were no so-called laws in this world. It was also because the observation habits and way of thinking that he brought from the physical universe were incompatible with this world, so the laws that he concluded before were all wrong. Unfortunately, he could not find a real person to communicate and discuss with at the moment. He could only record everything and make plans after he found the initiator and his closest friends. No matter what, in the spiritual universe, they were a group of lunatics who were full of desire and ambition, trying to figure out the truth. If they were not lunatics, they would never give up their almost immortal life and the identity and position that stood at the top of the evolution of all intelligent life forms, risking the risk of being devoured at any time to explore this completely unfamiliar place. Most importantly, this world seemed to have no boundaries at all, and there was no concept of direction. No matter how far one walked in a direction, all one could see was the endless white plain, boring and quiet. No sound, no change. Even the existence of space itself could not be confirmed. Fortunately, Zhang Cheng did not kill the unknown creature that turned into a bear cub. The intermittent communication between the two became the only bridge that could dispel the loneliness and loneliness. He could not even imagine how these spiritual life forms could survive in such an environment, and how they did not gradually lose themselves in the long journey and become monsters that only knew how to devour and kill. Just like that, with countless doubts and questions, the man and the bear finally arrived at the legendary place that was almost there. Admiring the undulating red island in the distance and the silver lake that surrounded the land, Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked, "Is this the place?" "Yes, this is the place." The bear monster nodded hard. It seemed to be very scared and did not dare to approach the silver lake that was constantly crashing against the shore as if it was some kind of prehistoric beast. Why is this place so different? Who created all of this through spiritual power? Zhang Cheng continued to ask while touching his chin. According to legends, this is the place where an overlord fell. What you see is only a small part of it left behind at the moment of its death. If nothing unexpected happens, this scene will last for a very, very long time, 10,000 times longer than the maximum lifespan of a being like me. When it said this, the bear monster's tone revealed a complicated and strong emotion. One must know that it rarely had any emotional fluctuations. Even if it was the first time it encountered a situation where it might be killed, it still remained calm, as if it had already accepted its impending death. Zhang Cheng observed the bear monster's reaction with great interest. After a while, he said, "Since this place is like a graveyard, and there's a huge amount of spiritual energy remaining, why didn't you think of coming here to get food and devour the spiritual energy to become stronger?" "No, you don't understand what it means to be an overlord. The power they possess and use is fundamentally different from ours. Once I devour even the tiniest bit of the overlord's power, I'll immediately be disintegrated and assimilated, turning into a mindless raider that roams around." As the bear monster explained, it carefully scooped up some lake water with its claws, turned around, and flung it hard at the white expanse behind it. Ha! Instantly, these splashing water droplets were like bombs, directly distorting the place they collided with, and at the same time releasing shocking shockwaves. A strange-looking creature jumped out from the ripples, its two eyes staring blankly ahead, its entire body crawling in an extremely uncoordinated manner. "This is a raider?" Zhang Cheng seemed to understand something, his eyes shining slightly. "That's right. This is a raider. In the beginning, they don't pose any threat, but not long after, the remnant power of the Overlord will take effect, causing them to madly attack everything they see, regardless of whether the opponent is strong or weak. If a raider lives for a long time without dying, it can become a moving disaster. Unless it encounters another Overlord, there's nothing that can threaten its existence." As soon as he finished speaking, the bear monster took advantage of the fact that the strange-looking raider was still in a daze to pounce on it and tear it to pieces. But out of fear, it didn't devour even the tiniest bit of its remaining spiritual power, allowing it to return to the silver lake water. Interesting. I have to admit, as a tomb, This place does have research value. If you don't mind, can you wait for me here for a while? Zhang Cheng turned around and asked the bear monster. Sure, but I won't wait too long. The next time I feel hungry, I'll choose to leave and look for prey. The bear monster hesitated for a moment, but quickly gave an affirmative answer. No problem. I'll be back before you feel hungry. After saying that, Zhang Cheng used his spiritual power to create a small boat, jumped on it, and sailed towards the small island in the middle of the lake. But before he could row halfway, a huge black shadow suddenly appeared from the bottom of the lake. The next second, boom, a strange fish with tens of thousands of eyes of various sizes all over its body jumped out of the water. The huge wave it created almost overturned the boat. When Zhang Cheng barely managed to stabilize the violently swaying boat, he realized that the fish's size had already surpassed the largest normal marine creature on Earth, the blue whale. Especially the large number of eyes that kept flashing with dark blue light, it was definitely enough to make people with trypophobia and deep-sea phobia feel numb. The strange fish obviously noticed Zhang Cheng on the surface of the water. After returning to the water, it began to circle the boat continuously, creating strong currents that prevented the boat from moving forward no matter how hard it paddled. Damn it! Don't tell me I'll end up being swallowed by a fish. Zhang Cheng complained rather helplessly. Without saying anything else, he used his spiritual power again to create a motor out of thin air and installed it at the back of the boat. Accompanied by the noise produced by the engine, the boat instantly accelerated and successfully broke through the surrounding currents. It rushed to the shore before the strange fish could react. Chapter 12:15. Splash. The strange fish seemed to have realized that it had been tricked and leaped out of the water again, splashing a large amount of silver water. It seemed like it was threatening Ouyang and demonstrating its power. Unfortunately, Zhang Cheng did not even turn his head. He ignored the fish and strode toward the deepest part of the island. Ever since he came ashore, he could clearly feel that everything around him was created by the powerful mental power emanating from the center of the island. In other words, there was definitely a shocking secret hidden inside. However, for some reason, these creatures that had lived in the spiritual world for a long time seemed to be very afraid of this place, so they would rather go far away than take the risk to approach it. Zhang Cheng speculated that it was most likely related to the looters that were born from the mental power left behind by the Death Overlords. Unfortunately, there was not enough evidence to prove this at the moment. With excitement and anticipation for the unknown, Ouyang slowly moved toward the center of the island along the increasingly steep path. The closer he got to the center, the brighter the ground under his feet became. In the end, it even looked like flowing blood. At the same time, from time to time, there would be a low whimper in the air, as if someone was crying. Strange, horrifying. It felt like there was a pair of invisible eyes staring at him. Unbelievable. Is this the mental power of an overlord? Even after the subjective consciousness disappears, it can still maintain its home ground and react according to the creatures that enter the area. No wonder no one dares to approach it easily. Even if they do, they only look at it from afar. After clearly understanding the power level of an overlord, Zhang Cheng's eyes began to glow. He felt that he had finally come into contact with the essence of the spiritual world. In his opinion, the so-called overlords should be the same as the ruler of the material world. They were the supreme beings that controlled a certain rule power. Their existence was basically equivalent to the ceiling of the spiritual world, just like how the ruler was the ceiling of the material world. Both of them could not be surpassed in their own world. They had to break the limits of their respective worlds and achieve their goals through a completely different power. As a greedy person, Zhang Cheng instinctively hoped that he could have more choices. Unfortunately, he had no choice at the moment. After passing through a dangerous blood-red forest, he finally saw a strange-looking creature. It was lying alone in a clean open space. It was neither rotten nor had any signs of being eaten. At first glance, it was vivid and lifelike, as if it had fallen into a deep sleep instead of being completely dead. However, if one were to carefully sense the spiritual power emitted by this creature, one would realize that it did not have any consciousness at all. It was just pure power emanating from it. In the spiritual world, after a creature died, everything about it would be converted into the purest spiritual energy for other creatures to devour. There would not be a corpse left behind. But now, not only was there a corpse, but this corpse also retained some of the power it had when it was alive. It was truly an unimaginable miracle. Just as Zhang Qing carefully approached the corpse, intending to do a few small experiments on it, an unprecedented malice suddenly hit him in the face and forced him back. Without a doubt, the corpse in front of him read or sensed his thoughts and took countermeasures. In just a few seconds, hundreds and thousands of raiders emerged from the blood-red ground. Unlike the muddle-headed raider he had seen not long ago, each of them launched an attack as soon as they appeared. In less than 10 seconds, Zhang Cheng was drowned alive by these cruel and violent monsters. Fortunately, he was already prepared. He directly created a ring-shaped force field out of thin air and deflected all these little monsters away. He then used his fastest speed to grab the corpse and run in the direction of the small boat. Run as fast as he could. If this island did not restrict flight, he would definitely not hesitate to use up a large amount of spiritual power to obtain the ability to fly. No, stop. You touched something you shouldn't touch. Put it down, or else. In the process of running, Zhang Cheng vaguely heard a voice in his ear. However, because it was too weak, he could not hear the latter part clearly. All that was left was a vague murmur. He was not sure if this voice came from the corpse's remaining consciousness or if it was another existence warning him. However, no matter what, he would not easily give up the precious experiment material that he had obtained with great difficulty. He believed that from this corpse, he would be able to obtain the true secrets of this world, as well as the complicated rules that were hidden under the false surface. What exactly was an overlord? What was the difference between their power and normal creatures? Why would the overlord's corpse not be decomposed after death? There were too many questions that needed an accurate answer. When he jumped onto the small boat again, the environment that was maintained by the corpse suddenly seemed to have lost its support and began to collapse. Especially the strange fish in the Silver Lake, it crazily rammed into the small boat. Needless to say, it realized that if the corpse was really taken away, then it would disappear forever. The Overlord's corpse that had existed for an unknown period of time had a shocking impact on the surrounding environment. It was to the extent that these created life forms began to have independent consciousness and complex thinking. Sorry, big guy, you've lived long enough. It's time for you to have a good sleep. Don't worry, I'll make good use of it. After that, Zhang Cheng turned around and smiled at the strange fish. He once again used his spiritual power to modify the small boat under his feet, turning it into a professional racing motorboat. Only the noise of the motor could be heard. The small boat was like an arrow leaving the bow, instantly leaving the strange fish far behind. Woo, 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 woo. The small boat was getting further and further away, getting further and further away. The strange fish finally impatiently let out a low growl. The sound wave quickly spread under the water and instantly set off a giant wave that was tens of meters tall. It used the rising force of the giant wave to jump up high and smash down like a heavy artillery shell. Bang! Accompanied by a loud noise and a sky full of spray, Zhang Cheng's small boat was finally overturned. It was less than 100 meters away from the shore. There was no hesitation. Without saying anything, he picked up the Overlord's corpse and ran toward the shore. The stranded strange fish followed closely behind, desperately swinging its tail and fins in an attempt to catch up. This was because the red island behind them had begun to collapse because it was too far away from the corpse. It returned to its original white, flat surface. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1216. A distance of 100 meters was not a long distance. It only took a few seconds. When Zhang Cheng stepped onto the shore, more than half of the island had completely disappeared. The Silver Lake was also gradually fragmented. Large amounts of lake water seemed to have lost control and splashed in all directions in the vast white world. The beautiful scene was enough to make anyone who saw it feel stunned and moved. Unfortunately, in this touching scene, there was a creature that was extremely out of place. It was constantly twisting its body and making whimpering sounds. The large eye in front of its body was constantly releasing messages of despair and pleading. Without a doubt, this strange fish did not want to die. It wanted to live, even if it was to be a tool, a pet that was kept around the Overlord's corpse. Unfortunately, Zhang Cheng coldly rejected it. He just stood by the shore and quietly watched the strange fish's body disappear bit by bit. No matter how it pleaded, roared, or struggled, he was not moved. He had seen too much pain, too much death, too much destruction and killing. Not to mention a mere ugly fish. Even if it were those people that he cared about in the past who blocked his way, he would mercilessly kick them away. After the last of the strange fish's injuries disappeared, Zhang Cheng carried the corpse that was only the size of a medium-sized dog and slowly returned to the rendezvous point. What were you holding in your hand? The bear monster that was lying on the ground seemed to have sensed something. It suddenly raised its head and opened its eyes, its body trembling uncontrollably. This, as you can see, it's just a corpse. Zhang Cheng smiled as he shook the spoils of war in his hand. No, you actually dare to desecrate the Overlord's corpse? The bear monster hurriedly retreated, its eyes filled with boundless fear. Desecrate? I didn't expect you to be able to use such high-level words. As your master, I am very pleased. Don't worry, it's just a corpse. No matter how powerful it was when it was alive, it's just a lifeless corpse now. Next, I need to find a safe place to stay for a while. Do you have any good recommendations? As Zhang Cheng asked, he created a large backpack and stuffed the corpse into it before carrying it on his back. Research required quietness and no disturbances. In this world where accidents could happen at any time, it was not easy to find such a place. This was because all living creatures had an innate talent, or rather, an instinct. They could sense how many other living creatures were within a certain distance. Therefore, no matter where they hid, they would not be able to avoid trouble. No. You lunatic, I want to leave. You're too dangerous. The bear monster's reaction. After struggling for a moment, it immediately turned and ran, escaping out of sight in the blink of an eye. Watching this pet, that had almost returned to its original size, run away, Zhang Cheng neither stopped nor chased after it. He just shrugged with a smile and sighed. What a coward. All right, as a reward for bringing me to this place, I won't kill you. Now, where should I go to find a safe place to conduct my research? While Zhang Cheng was deep in thought with precious experimental materials, in another unknown corner, Gru, who had abandoned everything, was also reconstructing himself in the spiritual world. Since it was his first time here, he was filled with curiosity and surprise about this white world. After a short while, he attempted to construct a small territory that belonged to him. He even created countless metal beetles that were identical to those in the material world. Trying, understanding, constructing, and creating. For a ruler who once grasped the supreme truth of the material universe, adapting to the spiritual world was not too difficult. The truly difficult part was letting go of the past, letting go of the powerful strength he once possessed, as well as his near-immortal life. Gru had bravely taken the first step, so he quickly grasped the second step. Most importantly, not far from where he was, he found several things left behind by the neutral faction's overlords. He also understood that these fellows were most likely dead. Out of an unknown heart, he carefully picked up the remnants. Just as he was about to take them away, a black shadow suddenly emerged from the ground and asked in a surprised voice, Gru? You're Chaos Lord Gru? That's right, it's me. Seeing the other party's blurry figure, Gru felt a trace of familiarity. It's me, more than neutral ring. The black shadow slowly revealed his true appearance. He had no feet, no legs, and didn't even have a torso. All he had was a black spiritual power pervading the surroundings. How did you become like this? What happened? Gru's voice was full of curiosity. The shadow called Mort shook his head with a wry smile. Don't mention it. We were too careless. To be more precise, we underestimated that fellow's madness. I'm the only one left alive in the neutral ring, and I'm in this ugly state. He really killed all 10 of you by himself? Yes. Even though we used unconventional methods, I have to admit that we failed. We failed completely. Then your current appearance is... I hesitated. I didn't immediately abandon my identity as a ruler, and a small problem occurred during the conversion process. This black color is a sign of being cursed and rejected by the spiritual world. Imagine what it feels like to be rejected by the entire world, and you'll understand my current situation, Mort explained with a bitter expression. Gru nodded thoughtfully. So that's how it is. He opened the door to the spiritual world and exposed all of you to the assault of spiritual power. What do you plan to do next? Plans. What plans can I have for someone cursed by the world? I have to think of a way to survive first. If possible, I think we can put aside our past unpleasantness and work together. No matter what, we both come from the material universe and are the supreme rulers of that world, aren't we? With that, Mort reached out a blurry black arm. My apologies, I need some time to think about it. However, Gru was clearly quite cautious. He stared at the black hand vigilantly and refused to let it touch him. His sharp sixth sense told him that this hand was very dangerous. Something bad would happen if he touched it. Chapter 12:17. Silence. Neither of them had the intention to speak first. They merely looked into each other's eyes. After a few minutes, Mort retracted his abnormal hand and teased with a smile. You seem to be very cautious and full of distrust towards me. However, it's no wonder. In this unfamiliar place, whether it's you or me, we're no longer high and mighty rulers. Instead, we're the most ordinary life forms. Our only advantage is our knowledge and wisdom. In such a dangerous environment, if we're not careful, we'll lose everything very quickly. What are you trying to say? Gru carefully maintained a safe distance. For some reason, he felt that something was amiss. To be precise, this fellow's attitude was a little off. It was as if he was deliberately hiding something. What I'm trying to say is, since we're both from the material universe, why don't we work together to deal with this crisis? Mort invited calmly. Sorry, I'm different from you fellows. I wasn't forced. I came to this world willingly. That's why there's a fundamental difference between us from the very beginning. Gru rejected him without even thinking about it. After all, cooperation was built on trust. However, both of them didn't even have the most basic trust. How could they put down their guard and work together? He couldn't even be sure what this fellow's goal was. Willingly? A strange glint flashed across Mort's eyes. Gru nodded lightly. That's right. I'm searching for the truth. I'm searching for answers that surpass my own limits. Also, if your goal is revenge, I suggest you give up on that idea. Why? Because you're doing something that will never succeed. What if I insist? Then I can only wish you good luck. In just a few short sentences, the surrounding atmosphere began to change subtly. In the end, Gru didn't say anything else. He turned and walked in another direction. Not long after, he disappeared without a trace. Once he was far away, Mort immediately turned around and said to the unknown black substance behind him, "Come out." He's gone. Instantly, 3 shadows that were 70 to 80% similar to him slowly took on different appearances. One of them asked impatiently, "Why did you let him go? We could take extreme measures and force him to serve our plan." Force him? Are you crazy? Gru was no ordinary lord of chaos. Moreover, didn't you feel that his spiritual arm is stronger than all of us? The other guy immediately put forward a different point of view. Needless to say, these were the lucky survivors of the neutral faction sovereigns. It was obvious that they had gathered to take revenge on the mastermind and make the culprit who had caused all of this pay the price. Oomph. So what if he was powerful? He still couldn't escape the cruel reality of being at the bottom of the food chain in this world. Perhaps we have almost unlimited power in the material world, but now we can be killed by the next creature we encounter at any time. Since Gru doesn't want to join us, we'll have to figure it out ourselves. I don't believe that he can defeat us a second time in this world. As he said this, Mort's eyes flashed with intense anger and hatred. However, he had reason to hate Zhang Cheng. It was precisely because of Zhang Cheng's actions that the neutral ring had fallen apart. The sovereigns were either dead or in their current state. They couldn't return to the material world, and they were also rejected by the spiritual world. It was as if they were on the edge of a crevice, enduring pain and despair at all times. But where are we going to find him? Or rather, how can we kill him? After all, this world is too big, and we still don't know what's going on. One of the fellows who had been silent all this time said, "Ha ha ha, didn't we just find a perfect guide?" Mort couldn't help but laugh loudly. That was because he could sense that Gru's attitude toward the spiritual world was shockingly similar to his enemies. This also meant that the two sides would meet sooner or later somewhere. As long as they followed from a distance, they wouldn't have to worry about not being able to find the other party's tracks. The others also quickly realized this possibility. They all turned into black shadows and chased after him at an extremely fast speed. These fellows had no idea that Zhang Cheng was already hiding in an unknown corner and studying the corpse he had risked his life to bring back. He planned to uncover the truth of the spiritual world and the secrets hidden on the Overlord's body. The next time they met, the difference in strength would be even more obvious. At the same time, the initiator and his friends finally arrived at the first gathering place built by intelligent life in the spiritual world after going through untold hardships. Unbelievable. Everything was created out of thin air by mental power. The man with the glasses gasped and was so shocked that he was speechless. Not far ahead, a city supported by hundreds of giant stone pillars stood at least 1,000 meters above the ground. All the scenes that were impossible to realize in the material world, or that completely violated the common sense of physics, were all realized here. Various strange houses floated in the air, and bridges that flickered with colorful lights connected the independent units together. Apart from that, every once in a while, a certain area in the city would undergo a series of unpredictable changes. In fact, there would even be a 180-degree change from style to color. Without a doubt, this was a dreamlike city, a real living city, and a city that was constantly changing. Nothing in the city, or even the city itself, was eternal. It was like a giant kaleidoscope where a gentle touch would reveal a different appearance. No, it's not just mental power. There's another rule. There's a powerful life form that's maintaining the city's operation. Be careful. I don't want anyone to recognize that we're from the material world, the initiator warned softly. Understood. In a place that's relatively isolated from the world, outsiders and intruders will always be treated with hostility. This is a universal law, no matter where it is or what era it is. All right, let's cut the crap and go in quickly. Hopefully, we'll find some clues here that can help us uncover more and more mysteries. Chapter 12:18. Some people said that a city was a symbol of civilization. If one wanted to understand what a civilization was like, one could get a pretty good idea by looking at the city they built. Although this was a bit biased, the idea expressed was not wrong. Generally speaking, a city meant the concentration of people, technology, and resources. It meant the evolution of a civilization away from primitive hunting and farming, and toward more advanced productivity and production relations. At least in the material universe, most civilizations followed this basic law. However, the city in the spiritual world completely overturned the initiator's understanding of the city. When he arrived at the gate, he found that everyone who entered had to strip their spirit power and hand it to the guards at the gate. The amount handed over was not fixed. It was about 1/10 of each person's total spirit power. In this world, spirit was nourishment and power. It was a precious resource necessary for survival and evolution. 1/10 of a person's spirit power was enough to greatly weaken the power of the creature. But what was interesting was that none of the people who entered the city dared to go against this rule. They didn't even try to bargain. They obediently handed over their portion and passed through the gate that looked like a monster's mouth, disappearing at the end of the ever-changing street. Out of caution, the initiator did not play any tricks this time. After handing over his portion, he quickly entered a place that looked like a square. He glanced at the strange life forms around him and asked his friend in a low voice, "What do you plan to start? Where?" No. The man with glasses smiled meaningfully and shook his head. My research has already begun. Do you feel the weak order that is everywhere? It is the foundation of this city's existence. Otherwise, I can guarantee that these seemingly honest fellows will turn into horrifying butchers in the next second, killing and devouring all the weaklings around them. What do you think this weak order comes from? The initiator asked with interest. The man pointed at the obelisk that stood in the middle of a large dark red building in the distance. Of course it's at the top. It's like a net that covers most of the city. As for the places that are not covered, I can guarantee that there are lawless places filled with chaos and evil. The initiator nodded thoughtfully. In other words, the ruler of this city, or rather, the master, lives inside the obelisk? What do you think? Are you interested in going to the nearest place with me for a closer look? The man's eyes flashed with fanaticism and obsession as he took the initiative to make a dangerous invitation. That was because even an idiot would understand that if the ruler of the city really lived in the obelisk, it would definitely be heavily guarded. If things went wrong, he might even be torn to pieces by the powerful guards. After all, they hadn't been in the spiritual world for long, and the guards here were so powerful. They weren't like the monsters outside who fought with their intuition and primitive instincts. Are you crazy? Or do you want to get us both killed? The initiator raised his eyebrows unhappily. He couldn't remember clearly, but this was the first time his old friend had gone crazy. In any case, ever since he came to the spiritual universe, he had been constantly stopping the other party's suicidal behavior. It could even be said that it was suicidal. But no matter what kind of danger he went through, the fanaticism in his bones showed no signs of diminishing. On the contrary, it was like a forest fire that burned even more fiercely. Die? Ha ha! You succeeded in making me laugh. Do you know? Strictly speaking, the moment you and I abandoned our physical bodies and entered the spiritual world, we were already dead by the definition of physics. From a certain perspective, we're all dead people, so why should we be afraid of dying again? God knows if there's another world hidden behind this world. All souls, spirits, and consciousness are like a huge cycle that constantly passes through various worlds. The more you know, the more ignorant you feel. I'm in such a state right now, a state of both happiness and distress. The man was obviously very stubborn. He had a unique worldview and values, and was unwilling to be dissuaded by any situation. In his eyes, he was an explorer and practitioner of the truth. As long as his consciousness still existed and he didn't stop thinking, he had to figure out all the mysteries that troubled him. Damn it! Calm down. Don't forget, if your spiritual power is completely devoured, you'll disappear from this world forever. It doesn't matter if the next cycle is waiting for you or not. You won't be able to figure out the secrets hidden behind this world. We're still very weak, and when we're weak, we should choose to lie low and not recklessly face a powerful enemy. The initiator reminded in a strict tone. He didn't want to be in danger because of his old friend's reckless actions. In the spiritual world, no one could really keep a secret. Every life's spiritual power contained a large amount of memories. God knows if there was any creature that could extract these memories. When that happened, the intelligent life of this world would realize that there was another universe outside of them, and there was a living invader. However, the man with glasses shrugged and comforted him. Relax, you're too nervous. In my opinion, the best way to understand this world is to find a smart and powerful person and have a face-to-face chat. Knowledge and information would only be valuable after being exchanged. If we're so selfish that we're unwilling to exchange information just to keep a so-called secret, aren't we as stupid and ignorant as those primitive people living in the Middle Ages? But have you thought about the consequences? As the weaker party, we don't have the right to choose at all. What you're doing is equivalent to a 3-year-old child carrying a large sum of money to make a deal with an unfamiliar adult. You don't even know if the other party will continue the deal in the next second or take everything of value away from you. The initiator directly explained the problem that he was most worried about. As everyone knew, a deal without the protection of a powerful force and order was often built on the basis of strength. This was because once one party found out that the other party was weak, it was very likely that the deal would evolve into a robbery. Regarding this point, I have already made full preparations. Give me some time, and I'll prove that my plan works. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1219. In the endless white world, what looked like a rather exquisite little house stood out on the horizon. There were no decorations around it, nor were there any defensive facilities. However, in this small house, something very frightening was going on. To be precise, Zhang Cheng was studying and dissecting the corpse that he had risked his life to bring back. Everything in the spiritual world, including the physical body, was produced by the combination of subjective consciousness and spiritual power. Therefore, instead of saying that he was dissecting the corpse of the Overlord, it was better to say that he was dissecting its remaining spirit and consciousness. On a round table less than a meter in diameter, there was a small object that emitted a faint red light. It was obvious that this thing was the most important part of the corpse. It was a combination of mental power and subjective consciousness, similar to a highly intensive organ, such as the brain. However, compared to brain cells, this thing was undoubtedly more complicated and full of things that went against the common sense of the material world. After a few days and nights of sleepless testing, Zhang Cheng roughly figured out some of its functions. He was in a state of extreme excitement. Looking at the fragmented memory fragments extracted from the residual subjective consciousness, he pursed his lips and muttered to himself, "Unbelievable. Is this the first time I've said this since I came to this world?" However, the more I delved into it, the more I discovered the close connection between the spiritual and material universes. Perhaps there's an eternal passage hidden in a place that no one knows about. Otherwise, how can the fact that the two affect each other be explained? The Overlord, the ruler standing at the top of the food chain in the spiritual world, actually died under the influence of the material universe. Without a doubt, the cause of death of this corpse was very simple. It was neither a fierce battle between its own kind, nor a natural death due to the exhaustion of its lifespan. It was a connection to the material universe that was opened for some reason. Just as the spiritual world was a fatal poison to the overlords, the material world was also a fatal poison to the overlords. Although their mental power was incomparably powerful and could even create a real small world that belonged to them, once their mental power was stripped away, what was left was only a small life form. In terms of close combatability, it might not be comparable to a domestic guardian dog. Under the tearing of the powerful material universe's rules, this overlord could not hold on in the end, so it turned into a cold corpse. He just didn't know if its subjective consciousness had also traveled to another universe and was reborn in another form like his own. Mysteries. One mystery after another. Most importantly, Zhang Cheng had figured out why the overlords were able to completely crush the other life forms in this world in terms of quality and quantity. The reason was not because of the reckless hunting and devouring. Instead, it was because of the change in the way mental power was used and stored. To put it simply, most living beings emitted their spiritual energy around their bodies in an unconscious state and could only be used when needed. In other words, they did not store mental power in their bodies. They only surrounded their bodies in the form of magnets for their subjective consciousness to use and consume. Sometimes they used it to fight, and sometimes they used it to replenish their bodies. However, the Overlord had evolved an organ to store mental energy, and at the same time, a network to transmit energy was formed in its body. Therefore, Overlords were superior to other life forms. In essence, they had evolved beyond other species. Excluding this part, their internal structure was basically the same. Perhaps every creature in the spiritual world would accumulate strength in the process of continuous hunting and devouring, and their bodies would become bigger and bigger. When they reached a critical point, the quantitative change would transform into a qualitative change, which was the evolution into the so-called Overlord. After figuring this out, Zhang Cheng quickly discarded the useless parts of the corpse and carefully soaked the organ in a special preservative bottle. He then destroyed the house that he had lived in for many days and continued to move forward. Through his conversation with the bear monster some time ago, He heard that in a faraway place, there was a city built in midair. It was filled with all kinds of intelligent creatures. He planned to see it with his own eyes and see if he could get any useful information or clues while he was at it. After all, a city meant that the population was concentrated, and it meant that information was convenient. He could spend the least amount of time to obtain the most useful information. Besides, a city was also a symbol of civilization. As a person who was used to living in civilization, Zhang Cheng could not stand dealing with a white and desolate world every day. He also did not want to meet people who only wanted to kill him and devour his spiritual energy every time he met them. Only wild beasts would be satisfied with eating, mating, and resting. Higher life forms all hope to obtain more exquisite, and more complex spiritual and material enjoyment. With anticipation for the city in the spiritual world, he quickly embarked on this journey with an uncertain future. He had no idea what kind of interesting things were waiting for him next. He also did not know that another him had entered the city and was trying to reach a deal with the ruler of the city. Greetings, great Lord Warlock. Standing in the huge and magnificent palace, the initiator bent down and bowed to the huge figure on the high seat. I heard from the guards that you want to see me. The giant called Warlock held his chin with interest, and his eyes flashed with a playful light. In his eyes, a guy with a weak spiritual energy like this was not worth being vigilant against at all. Therefore, he wanted to kill time or play a little game of cat and mouse. That's right. I have a very important news, and I hope to share it with you. The initiator suppressed the fear in his heart and responded with a forced smile. Oh, tell me, if your news doesn't satisfy me, I'll let the guards throw them into the dark alley outside of order. Believe me, delicious little fellows like you will definitely cause quite a fierce competition. When he said this, Warlock raised the corner of his mouth, and he did not hide his naked, evil interest. Dark Alley, as the name implied, was a place in the city that was not covered by the rules of order. There, any rules must be followed. The survival of the fittest was the most basic rule. If you were strong, you could hunt others and seize their spiritual energy. If you were weak, you would become prey and be seized and devoured by others. It was obvious that the places in the city that were not covered, but were deliberately left as places for recreation and entertainment. Chapter 12:20. In fact, my companions and I are not natives of this world. We came from another universe, a place completely dominated by matter and energy. The initiator was not a fool. He noticed the flash of mockery in the other party's eyes and knew that he could not keep the other party in suspense. Otherwise, he would be the unlucky one. Although he had not been to the dark alley, he had heard of the lawless situation there. To put it simply, the dark alley was like a no-man's land. Whoever had the bigger fist would be able to carve out a bloody path inside. It was the first place that outsiders usually went to, and it was also the first stop that most settlers had to go through. Only by entering the dark alley would the penniless outsiders have the opportunity to earn their first bucket of gold through killing. Otherwise, they would be kicked out quickly because they could not afford the expensive fees. This city had never been a gentle place. It was a city of vampires in the true sense of the word. As the founder and the owner of this city, Morlock had always been using this method to reasonably and legally plunder the spiritual power of the residents in the city, turning it into nourishment for his own development and growth. No one knew whether he was the overlord or not, and no one knew how powerful he was. Anyone who tried to challenge the throne of the city lord had disappeared without exception. In the true sense, the complete annihilation of the body, the soul, and the subjective consciousness. The initiator did not want to go to the dark alley at all, because he was not sure if he would have a chance to come out after going in. Therefore, he simply revealed the most shocking information as soon as he opened his mouth. From another universe? Morlock raised his drooping eyelids. His pale yellow eyes flashed with a strange light. That's right. The initiator hurriedly nodded. We all came from the material universe in order to explore the possible secret connection between the two worlds. In addition, in order to gain your trust, we also prepared this in advance. As soon as he finished speaking, he presented a special book filled with complicated knowledge and theories with both hands. This was not an ordinary book. It was a special tool that consumed a lot of spiritual power to create. It recorded a lot of biology, machinery, physics, mathematics, and other things that could only be mastered by advanced civilizations. Even if a group of intelligent creatures living in a primitive society obtained this book, they could develop into a powerful space civilization in a short period of time. It was clear that knowledge was precious. No matter the time or the world, it was an eternal and unchanging law. When Morlock flipped to the first page, he was immediately attracted by the contents. About half an hour later, he began to create all kinds of technological products on his palms. In a short while, the entire huge palace was filled with them. The speed was so fast that it was shocking. Fortunately, this crazy creation did not last long. When he found that there was no empty space around him, he waved his hand and destroyed all the creations. He grinned and said, "Well, now I kind of believe that you are indeed intruders from another world. Tell me, what do you want from me, and what are you willing to pay?" For the record, this book is only a gift and cannot be used as a bargaining chip. Of course, what we want is very simple, and that is knowledge, everything about the world. If you don't mind, I hope you can open your private library for us to stay for a few days. In return, I will tell you how to open the door to the material universe. The initiator calmly stated the conditions. To be honest, he did not have any hope that this plan would succeed. This was because, just like how most rulers were unwilling to give up their powerful strength and start anew in the spiritual world, the powerful life forms of this world would not be willing to give up everything and go to the material world, even if it was the only way to break through the restrictions and evolve toward the higher life form. Sounds very interesting. All right, I agree to your conditions. However, there's one thing, and that is that the taxes you have to pay every day cannot be reduced. Morlock was obviously not a generous person and immediately added a condition. There was no need to ask to know that he was purposely making things difficult for them. After all, living in the area covered by the rules of order, they had to pay a portion of their spiritual power every day. If they did not go out to plunder, they would quickly be depleted by constant deductions. No problem. If you don't mind, can we start from when the obelisk is lit up for the second time? The initiator continued to probe without changing his expression. Morlock laughed and nodded. Sure. However, I am very curious. Since you are penniless, what do you plan to hunt for spiritual power? Hee. Regarding this, there is no need for you to worry about it. We will take care of it ourselves. In addition, please do not underestimate the power of another universe. Even if we are so weak now, we can still defeat many enemies who appear to be stronger than us. As the last word left his mouth, the initiator bowed again without another word, turned around, and disappeared at the end of the dark and narrow corridor. As soon as he left, Morlock threw the book in his hand to the servant beside him and ordered without turning his head, "Send a message to that fellow. Tell him that a group of mysterious people have come from his homeland." "That fellow? You mean Lord Byron?" The servant's eyes suddenly widened, as if he could not believe that his master would actually inform his former enemy. "Yes, apart from Byron, there's also that fellow who came from another universe. Moreover, I suspect that it is not just one or two this time. There are many more behind them." Morlock raised his thick fingers and lightly tapped the table. He looked so gloomy, not at all like his previous smiling self. "As you wish, master." After the servant bowed, he immediately disappeared from the spot. At the same time, in another 100 years, Gru, who had traveled a long distance, finally saw the strange city towering in midair with his own eyes. He took a deep breath and praised. "It's too beautiful. It's breathtakingly beautiful. I really did not expect civilization to exist in this primitive and barbaric place of slaughter. Now go, my children, and find out what is in this city." Soon, a large number of white metal beetles formed groups and climbed over the city walls, entering the chaotic dark alleys. However, in less than a minute, 70% of the metal beetles had completely disappeared. Damn it, I almost forgot. This is a spiritual world. To life forms that use spiritual power to explore their surroundings, these metal beetles are as conspicuous as torches in the dark. Gru complained in a low voice, vexed. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1221. No one knew whether it was a coincidence or the so-called arrangement of fate. In short, within a short period of time, several intruders from the material universe all gathered in this unusual city. At the same time, there were also some special gazes gathered here. For a time, a huge and dangerous vortex had formed around this city. Of course, as one of the parties involved, Zhang Cheng was slowly moving along the narrow path in the dark alley area. He didn't care about those pairs of malicious eyes hiding in the dark corners. As he walked, he muttered to himself, "Interesting, setting up a lawless zone outside of order. Is this intentional or unintentional?" As soon as his voice fell, a few life forms with relatively low intelligence finally couldn't resist the urge to hunt in their hearts. They directly jumped out of the darkness and began to attack crazily. In this Azura-like environment, reason had long been swallowed by the purest strong urge to kill. The only thing they could do every day was to constantly devour the enemy, or be devoured by the enemy one day. Only a few could ensure that they wouldn't be dominated by the terrible primitive impulse and leave with enough soul power before completely going crazy. Of course, it couldn't be ruled out that some guys were here to constantly devour and grow, evolving in the direction of becoming more powerful. After all, compared to aimlessly searching for prey in the wild, it was better to stay in the dark alley area. At least there was no need to worry about not finding prey here. But the disadvantage was that you never knew whether you would be the prey or the hunter in the next second. The frequent killing and death made these strange life forms look like pure wild beasts. They didn't want to communicate or exchange any information. One of the prerequisites to enter the city was to have a certain level of intelligence. But now, they actually abandoned the most precious thing on their bodies and gradually degenerated into monsters driven by primitive instincts in the continuous killing. How sad. Let me help you get rid of it. Zhang Cheng sighed slightly. He raised his hand and instantly released a small ball of red light. Although this light looked so dim, as if it could be extinguished at any time. However, those who had launched an attack, or were about to launch an attack, suddenly fell to the ground and trembled as if they had met their natural enemy. No one dared to resist. No one tried to escape. It was as if they had obeyed the arrangements of some mysterious power and were obediently welcoming their impending deaths. Without a doubt, as a merciless executioner, Zhang Cheng would never show the slightest bit of mercy to his enemies. Without saying a word, he tore apart all the living beings near the entrance of the dark alley. In just a few seconds, their mental energy was swallowed up by the weak red light. The whole process was unbelievably fast. It was obvious that the faint red light was none other than the mysterious organ obtained from dissecting the Overlord's corpse. Since Zhang Cheng never lacked madness in his bones, he took a huge risk and temporarily transplanted the organ into his body. Although it was impossible for them to fuse together due to the huge difference in their genes, it was not a problem for them to borrow some power. At the very least, he only needed a single thought to deal with these small fries. He glanced at the empty alleys around him. His heart was as calm as a lake without any ripples. He quickly turned around and continued to move into the dark alley. However, not long after Zhang Cheng left, a wooden stick less than 30 centimeters long suddenly jumped up from the ground. It held its chest and sighed, "Phew, that's too scary. Where did this guy come from? It's so terrifying, especially the power he used. It's completely like an overlord. No, I have to sell this information quickly and leave this city. God knows what will happen next." After saying that, it spread its two slender and long legs and ran like its life depended on it. It did not take long for it to rush into the center of the city that was covered by order. At the same time, in the library on the upper level of the obelisk, two guys were frantically reading through a large amount of information. Of course, the library was just a name that was passed down from Earth. The people in this world called it a memory bank. Just like the name, it collected countless memory fragments after death. With the help of a simple device, anyone could find a memory they wanted and find the answer to a question. However, this place was too big. No one knew how long it had been there. The memories that were densely packed in special containers were like bookshelves. They were densely packed and placed on a huge shelf. The initiator, who had not rested for a long time, looked extremely tired. Its eyelids were fighting as if it could fall asleep at any time. One had to know that even in the spiritual world, sleep was a very important means of recovery. It could stabilize a life, forms control over its own spiritual power. If one did not rest for a long time, the spiritual power would naturally dissipate faster and eventually lead to the collapse of one's subjective consciousness and death. Damn it, there's too much useless garbage in this information. At this rate, let alone a few days, I might not be able to complete it even after decades. The initiator threw down a memory and could not help but grumble as it held its forehead. Most importantly, these memories were the memories of living creatures. Therefore, there were a lot of parts that were meaningful to the dead creatures themselves, but meaningless to the reader. Relax. If you're tired, go rest for a while and hunt for some prey in the dark alley area. It'll be time to pay the tax soon. With the remaining spiritual power in our bodies, it won't be enough for next time. All right, you continue. I'll try to hunt more this time and bring your share out. The initiator stood up and shook off the non-existent dust on its body. It quickly disappeared around the corner of the stairs. Compared to flipping through hundreds of millions of memories, he was clearly more willing to kill. Through this method, he could relieve the boredom and depression in his heart. However, it did not know that the entrance to the dark alley area, which it used to frequent, was now empty. The initiator, Zhang Cheng, had arrived at the center of the dark alley area, which was known as the most dangerous and also the most terrifying area. The creatures that lived here could be roughly divided into two categories. One was slaves and food that wore special shackles, and the other was powerhouses that exuded a terrifying aura. The Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1222. Look, a delicious little snack actually walked in front of us by itself. A strange creature with a lower body like a spider and an upper body like a snake bent down and teased with two light purple eyes. Although her appearance was so twisted and strange, her face was indeed an extremely delicate and beautiful woman. Another guy wrapped in a hard shell or an exoskeleton sneered and asked in a half-joking tone, "What? Are you planning to eat him? Don't be silly. For such an interesting toy, you must play with it for a while before eating it. At least let him learn to obey and fear." Obey and fear. Ha ha. I like your sense of humor. But forget it. To avoid conflict, I think we should first follow the rules and decide who he belongs to. Finally, the white crystal-like creature floating in the air suggested. It could be seen that the three of them were the masters of the dark alley, the supreme ruler of this lawless area. Those crazy guys outside dared not approach the core area at all. And unlike the chaos at the entrance, there was obviously a kind of order here, a kind of order full of oppression, slavery, and cruelty. It was not like the rumors outside, where there was always chaos. Sorry, may I ask, were you guys talking about me just now? Zhang Cheng pointed at his nose and sniffed. Shut up. In front of us, you have no right to speak. The guy wrapped in a hard shell scolded loudly. Delicious little snack. Let me give you a piece of advice, and that is to be obedient. Otherwise, this bad-tempered guy will definitely drain all the energy in your body and make you into a lifelike specimen and decoration. The monster with the beautiful female face reminded with a smile. Oh, really? Zhang Cheng pretended to be surprised and widened his eyes as if he was shocked and frightened. But in the next second, he released the weak red light again. The three guys who didn't react in time suddenly felt an indescribable, terrifying pressure. They couldn't even stand still and fell to the ground, trembling uncontrollably. But it wasn't just them. The unlucky, enslaved people reacted even more violently than the former, and many of them fainted. Bastard! My body! No! I can't control my mind and soul. This is the power of an overlord. You? Who are you? Compared to those insignificant characters, these three fellows who controlled the dark alley were obviously very powerful. Although they also had the aura of an overlord, they had not completely lost the ability to resist. Quite the opposite. Zhang Cheng dared to guarantee that if he launched an attack at this time, the three of them would definitely fight to the death instead of waiting for death. The difference in strength between him and the enemy was still a little big, so he decided to maintain a sense of mystery. He smiled and asked, "Who do you think I am? I don't care who you are. It would be best if they all retracted this power immediately. Otherwise, if you alert the city lord, I guarantee that you won't be able to leave here alive." The monster with the beautiful female face warned. Perhaps the dark alley district was a no man's land, but it was deliberately left behind by the city lord, and not because he didn't have the ability to clear out the darkness and evil hidden in the dark alley district. If something happened here that violated his bottom line, the city lord would definitely not hesitate to launch a great purge. If necessary, he would kill all the creatures that lived here. At most, he would relax the restrictions on entering and leaving the city, and the empty dark alley district would quickly be filled up again. City Lord? Are you talking about that guy called Morlock? Zhang Cheng was suddenly interested and immediately retracted the power of an overlord. When he was wandering around the city, he had heard countless people mention the name Morlock. It was said that for as long as he could remember, Morlock, who had the appearance of a giant, was already a famous expert. Especially since he was different from most of the people who thought that they were strong, he was very willing to make friends, and even took the initiative to help those who had the same intelligence to get out of trouble. Over time, he gathered a sizable force. After a long period of development, this small force gradually grew into a large force, and finally built this miraculous city. No matter which angle you looked at it from, this was an immortal legend. After all, when building a city in the spiritual world, the first thing they had to face was the destruction from hostile creatures, as well as the overlords that often flew over the sky. But this city had stood for countless years, and there had never been any rumors of it being attacked by enemies. Even if there were one or two overlords that flew over occasionally, they had never harmed any of the residents. It was this strong sense of security that made it an ideal refuge for many intelligent creatures that yearned for peace. That's right, City Lord Morlock. The monster with a female face slightly raised her neck, and her gem-like eyes flickered with a radiance. Believe me, you don't want to see him. Because his appearance usually means a merciless massacre, which means 100% annihilation. Then what are the benefits? What do I get in return for not killing you? Zhang Cheng carefully maintained a safe distance from them, pretending to be mysterious and unfathomable. But in reality, if the Overlord's power was excluded, the three of them could deal with him in a very short time. But unfortunately, the Overlord's power in this world was too shocking, and no one dared to resist. What do you want to get? Without the terrifying pressure, the white crystal once again floated up, emitting a mesmerizing halo. It's very simple. I want all the information you have. No matter what kind of rubbish information it records, don't let any of it go. I promise, after reading this information, I will leave. At that time, you will still be the high and mighty overlords of the Dark Alley. Zhang Qing calmly stated the purpose of this trip. Compared to the extremely shocking obelisk, he believed that starting from the bottom of society should be the easiest and also the safest way to obtain knowledge and information. Information and information? That's all. Yes, that's all. But I suggest that you move quickly. My patience has never been good. If I don't see what I want in a short period of time, then I'm afraid that your safety won't be guaranteed. When he said this, Zhang Cheng's tone revealed a naked threat. Chapter 1223. There was no doubt that Zhang Cheng was more inclined to obtain useful information through the lower-level channels rather than directly reading the things that were deliberately preserved. Although most of the information had been processed more than twice, and some were even unreliable rumors, it was still much better than being misled. First-hand information often meant building an understanding of the entire spiritual world in one's heart. If this step was wrong, it would continue to be wrong. Although it was not impossible to change, it would inevitably lead to more detours. Therefore, Zhang Cheng would rather filter out the parts that he thought were useful from the countless complicated and cumbersome information rather than contact the city's ruler too early. Just as he patiently read the copied memory fragments, a violent wave of spiritual power suddenly came from afar. It was obvious that a fierce battle had broken out somewhere in the dark alley. The powerful force could be clearly felt even from afar. What happened over there? Zhang Cheng casually threw away a worthless memory and looked up to ask the creature with a beautiful female face not far away. The latter hesitated for a moment and quickly responded, "It's an intruder. This is the 4th time he's attacked the dark alley recently to plunder the spiritual power of the weak." Intruder? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. After all, the dark alley was originally a hunting ground. Other than the few people in front of him who occupied the ruling positions, the rest would not see it as a writer or a place where they could live forever. Since they did not see it as a writer, there would naturally be no sense of identity and cohesion. Anyone could enter the dark alley and leave at any time. The word intruder should not be used at all. That's right, intruder. The creature with a beautiful female face nodded lightly. He's the same as you. He appeared in this city all of a sudden. According to the information we received, he seemed to have made some kind of deal with Governor Moloch. He allowed them to enter the memory bank and read the ancient memories to find the answers to certain questions. Memory bank? Zhang Cheng's pupils suddenly contracted when he heard the word. Because of his familiar behavior, it suddenly reminded him of an old friend who also broke his hand for the sake of divination. What? Are you interested in the memory vault as well? The crystal-like life form seemed to have sensed something and floated forward a little. Zhang Cheng glanced meaningfully at the other party's words and shrugged nonchalantly. I'm not interested, just curious. Can you tell me more about the memory bank and this intruder? The more detailed, the better. Memory vault, as the name suggests, is a place where memories are stored. No one knew how long City Lord Moloch had lived, and no one knew how many powerful enemies he had killed, but the memories of the enemies he had killed were kept intact in his memory bank. Therefore, if you want to obtain knowledge or clues to ancient secrets, the memory vault is your only choice. However, there was a small problem. The city lord was not a generous person. On the contrary, he was so stingy that he would never let go of any opportunity to gain benefits. So if you want to enter the memory bank, you have to offer something that makes Moloch feel like it's worth it. As for the intruder, I only know that he had a companion. In the beginning, both of them were not strong and could even be said to be rather weak. But for some reason, ever since he entered the memory bank, he would become stronger every time he appeared. Now, the cannon fodder outside can't do anything to him. While speaking, the crystal-like life form's body kept flickering with 2 different colors of light. It might be a fluctuation of emotions, or it might be activating some unknown ability. In short, it was not the same as those flesh and blood. It was more like it was artificially created and not born naturally. At the very least, until now, he had not encountered a second life form similar to it in the spiritual world. I see. Zhang Cheng's face showed a thoughtful expression. Then he smiled and nodded. All right, it seems like I need to meet this intruder and ask him if he knows what I'm looking for. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw the memory fragments piled up on the table and walked directly to the location of the battle. About 10 minutes later, a familiar figure finally appeared at the end of the dark alley. The slightly exhausted initiator lifted its head and sucked in the scattered mental power around it. Every time it took in a mouthful, it would squint its eyes in enjoyment. When the last bit of mental power was sucked clean, it sighed a breath of relief and mumbled with a smile, "No matter what kind of world it is, the increase of one's power is always enjoyable, especially the unparalleled pleasure, which can't be compared by any spiritual or material enjoyment." Are you addicted? Seeing as it was an old acquaintance, Zhang Cheng immediately walked out from the corner and spoke in a surprised tone. This was because he had also experienced the same feeling, so he knew very well what kind of adverse effects would be caused if one frequently devoured mental power for a long time. It's you. You're really here. The initiator was obviously startled, but he quickly calmed down after seeing the face of the newcomer. Even though they were opponents, cooperation was unquestionably more attractive than confrontation in the current environment. Yes, it's me. Answer my question. Are you addicted? Zhang Qing's eyes flickered with a deep light. The initiator quickly shook its head and denied it. No, it's not an addiction. I just enjoy the feeling of becoming stronger. Zhang Qing did not say anything. He only stared at the initiator's eyes for a full minute before he said with certainty, "No, you're addicted. You're immersed in the unparalleled pleasure and can't extricate yourself. If I'm not mistaken, your old friend must have never consumed mental power before. He's only taking a little from you to maintain his existence, right? What are you trying to say?" The initiator subconsciously narrowed its eyes. What I'm trying to say is, you've unknowingly fallen into a trap. Think about it seriously, and you'll understand soon enough. Damn it, it's him. He's been luring us since the beginning. Who is he? It's Moloch. Chapter 12:24. In a conversation between two smart people, they didn't need to say too much to understand each other's meaning. Through the short conversation, the initiator quickly realized that the reason why Mayor Moloch insisted on making him pay the tax was not for the ridiculous amount of mental power, but to make him immerse himself in the pleasure of constantly sucking and being unable to extricate himself. The power that the initiator absorbed was not completely absorbed for his own growth. He had to continuously give it to another person. This also meant that the initiator did not actually gain anything. He was merely a transfer station that absorbed the energy with his left hand and right hand, leaving only the addictive enjoyment. When the initiator thought about how he almost became someone's toy, he instantly felt a fire burning in his heart, and a cold and dangerous light flickered in his eyes. After forcing himself to calm down for a while, he clenched his fists and said emotionlessly, "Since you're here, it means that you have the same goal as us, right?" "That's right." Zhang Qing admitted openly because there was no need to hide anything. That was because there was no need to hide such things. Anyone who was willing to give up the power, identity, and status of a ruler would definitely have higher ambitions. They would seek to break through their limits and surpass them once again. Very good. Are you interested in joining forces with me again? If I remember correctly, the last time we worked together, we gave the enemy a memorable lesson. The initiator took the initiative to offer an invitation. Sure, but there's a prerequisite. All knowledge, information, and research successes must be shared without hiding anything. Zhang Qing did not hesitate to offer his conditions. As the first person to enter the spiritual world, the guy with the glasses must have more information than Ouyangming. So Ouyangming would not be the one at a disadvantage if he shared the information. Moreover, Ouyangming had hidden his most important discovery in his body. Unless he displayed his power, nobody would notice the organ that belonged to the Death Overlord. Share everything. The initiator hesitated for a while, but he nodded in the end. No problem, but you must make a corresponding contribution. There's no free lunch in the world, and there's no free benefit. If you want to get something, you must pay a price. I agree. Then, may we have a pleasant cooperation again? Zhang Qing reached out his right hand. Without saying a word, the initiators also extended their right hands and shook hands with each other according to the etiquette on Earth. After the handshake, Zhang Qing immediately asked impatiently, "I heard that you and your old friend have already entered Warlock's memory chamber. How is it? Did you find anything interesting?" A lot. So much that it's beyond your imagination. Do you know? I originally thought that this world was at most a world, and it was not worthy of being called a universe. But after reading it, I found that the depth and breadth it represented was not much worse than our physical universe. Spirit, to put it bluntly, was an extension of one's will. It was a mixture of imagination, creativity, and the ability to change reality. In the material universe, everything was dominated by matter and energy. Spirit could only rely on matter to change reality. But here, the spirit can surpass everything. When he said this, the initiator seemed to be very emotional. He opened his arms like a madman, trying to embrace something that did not exist. But soon, he returned to normal. With a smile on his face, he continued, "According to the fragments we found in those memories, we discovered an important secret. In fact, the connection between the two universes existed a long, long time ago. Do you still remember those rulers who went missing or died? A few of them came to this world. Some of the powerful individuals here also broke through the barriers and went to the material universe. Then, of these pioneers who broke through the barriers and tried to surpass their own limits, did any of them succeed in the end? Or rather, did any of them survive? Zhang Cheng was undoubtedly very interested in this topic. His eyes flickered with an intense and crazy desire. Sorry, I don't know, because those fragments of memories were too short, too vague. Moreover, although this world looks like a vast expanse of white, it is actually very large. At least in Warlock's memories, he had entered and exited over 100 cities like this. With that said, the initiator turned around and grabbed the spy hiding in the corner, tearing him to pieces and devouring him. Over 100 cities? Upon hearing this number, even though Zhang Cheng was mentally prepared, he could not help but open his mouth slightly. It must be noted that this was not a city that was purely formed by a dense population in the material world. Instead, it was a stronghold that could only ensure stability and survival after establishing a strong order through force. First, one had to be able to ensure that the city could avoid the attacks of terrifying creatures like the overlords. This was not easy because the overlords were powerful individuals at the end of the spiritual world's evolution. To them, intelligence was not necessary at all. Therefore, many overlords were like wild beasts. They did not have so-called intelligence at all and still followed the naked law of the jungle, where the strong preyed on the weak. Without intelligence, it meant that communication and negotiation were impossible. One could only expel the overlords through a series of methods, and even resort to force. In other words, the founder of every city must have a way to deal with the overlords. In fact, the founder of the city was an overlord himself. Secondly, one had to ensure that the lunatics who tried to strengthen themselves through plundering would not let the order within the city go out of control. The city itself and the vast and boundless wilderness of the spiritual world were in a state of complete opposition. In particular, there were no rules at all in the latter. Every encounter in the wilderness was basically an enemy, so the only thing one needed to do was to kill them and plunder their mental power. However, the city was a symbol of order, so a set of rules must be established. Living beings that came here must learn to replace the most primitive plundering through transactions. Lastly, and most importantly, there must be enough intelligent life forms as support. After all, in this world, beast-like life forms had an overwhelming advantage. If there were enough intelligent life forms to fill over 100 cities, it meant that there were thousands of beast-like intelligent life forms. Zhang Cheng was very curious. Where exactly were these creatures born? Was it the fusion between spirits? Or was it similar to sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction in the material world? Or was there a secret place similar to the birthplace where all sorts of larvae were produced every day? They would then devour each other to evolve and only leave when they grew to a certain level? The Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1225. Without a doubt, the news brought by the initiator gave Zhang Cheng a whole new understanding of this world. At the same time, he also realized that the danger he was about to face might not only come from the spiritual world itself, but also from the pioneers who came here a long time ago. After all, they had been in this world for too long. If they were still alive, their power would be far beyond imagination, and they might even be on the verge of breaking the limit. As the saying went, sometimes the scariest enemies were not the ones on the surface, but the threats hidden in the dark. Just like that, the two enemies who should have hated each other so much decided to join forces again. When they returned to the huge room filled with memories, the man with glasses finally put down Yujio. His eyes flashed with joy, and he revealed a rare smile. "Ah, look who's here. You're just as I expected. You'll never let go of the chance to surpass the limit. Thank you for the compliment. If I remember wrongly, you've never appeared in the organization before, right?" Zhang Cheng looked at the man with interest. To be honest, Although he had heard a lot of rumors about the man in front of him, it was the first time he saw him with his own eyes. Different from the impression most people had of a genius, this man looked a little depressed. His short silver-gray hair was messy, and his two black eyes were like whirlpools, filled with the light of wisdom. Needless to say, if 1/10 of the rumors were true, he should not be underestimated. That's right. If you're talking about meeting, this is indeed the first time. But actually, we met a long time ago. To be exact, I've tried to use genetic technology to clone countless of you. I found a special way of thinking where rationality and madness are mixed together. Do you know? I'm very interested in you because you've proven that extreme contradiction and unity can actually coexist. While saying this, the man gently took off the glasses that he created with his spiritual power. One must know that the spirit was an extension of one's consciousness, so wearing glasses was just a deep-rooted habit. As for his myopia, it was long gone. You've cloned me. It was obvious that it was the first time Zhang Chung heard this, and he frowned subconsciously. If any normal person heard that someone had cloned them, they would probably be instantly enraged. They would either loudly ask the other party what their motive was or directly kill them. Fortunately, he wasn't a normal person and wasn't too angry about the cloning of himself. He just felt a little unhappy, especially when he thought of the countless times he had been used as a test subject and thrown into all kinds of environments to undergo cruel tests. The coldness in Zhang Cheng's eyes grew even colder. But the man didn't care. He smiled and nodded yes. Not only did I clone you, but I also cloned myself and him. I've always wanted to prove that the so-called fate doesn't actually exist. What truly determined a person's future was a certain quality within the person or the influence of the acquired environment. However, the results of the experiment proved that my guess was wrong. Fate really did exist. No matter how many clones I create, no matter how favorable the conditions are for the development of these clones, none of them can reach the heights that you, him, and me have achieved. So you believe in fate? Zhang Chung raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yes, I believe in fate. It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? In fact, I didn't want to believe it at first, but data and reality are always more persuasive than anything else. As a gift for our first meeting, I'll give you this experiment data about cloning. I hope that in the future, we can trust each other wholeheartedly. At least before we get rid of all the enemies, we can ensure that this alliance is unbreakable. As he spoke, the man stuck a finger into his head and slowly pulled out a huge pile of data. Through the simple space, Zhang Chung quickly saw a shocking scene. It turned out that when he was still living on Earth, this seemingly harmless guy had secretly cloned millions of himself and then randomly threw them to various corners of the universe. Through a very secretive method, he silently observed and recorded the living conditions of each experimental subject, and when necessary, he would provide limited help. However, without exception, they all experienced a cruel failure at a certain stage. Most of them were dead, and there were very few who were strong enough to survive. He didn't know anything about such a large-scale experiment. Just this point alone made Zhang Chung shudder. At the same time, he was secretly wary of this old friend of the initiator, because from a certain point of view, the latter was more dangerous and secretive than the former. Moreover, he didn't have much ambition. He just wanted to understand the truth behind everything. What was the universe? What was the connection between matter, energy, and spirit? If the two universes merged into one, or if a stable passage was opened, what would happen? Just like those questions that had always troubled Zhang Chung, now they were also troubling this fellow who wanted to get to the bottom of it. After figuring this out, he casually put away the memory and planned to slowly look at it when he had the time. Then he asked without raising his head, "What are you going to do next? Don't tell me that you're going to allow Governor Moloch to continue playing those dirty tricks." I was going to endure it for a while, but since you're joining us, I think it's time to return the favor." The man pursed his lips and revealed a dangerous smile. Agreed. My temper isn't so good that I have to smile when I'm being plotted against. The initiator obviously had a strong resentment. If he hadn't discovered it early, it wouldn't have taken long for him to lose himself in the incomparable pleasure. Tell me, what's the plan? Most importantly, what level of power does this governor have? How can we make him feel fear? After all, the spirit of revenge is to make your enemy taste pain, despair, and regret from the bottom of his heart. Then, when he starts to beg for mercy, we'll take away his last hope bit by bit. Zhang Cheng described in an unhurried tone. Ha ha, I like your attitude and reaction to hatred. Looks like our cooperation will be very pleasant. I hope so. Chapter 1226. Al, tell me, what have those two fellows been up to recently? Sitting on the empty throne inside the obelisk, Moloch was holding his chin with one hand, his two eyes staring straight at the door in the distance. As the founder of this city, as well as the supreme master, he definitely shouldn't show any emotions of nervousness or panic. Because relying on the knowledge he obtained from an old friend, he had already established a kind of order network called the spectral light in this area. This kind of network could not only resist the invasion of all kinds of wild monsters, it could even make the strongest overlords subconsciously ignore this city and not launch an attack. In addition, after a long period of harvesting spiritual force in the name of taxes, Moloch's strength had long since improved. Even if he sat on the chair and couldn't move, he could easily sense every movement in most areas of the city. But regrettably, the dark alleys were clearly not one of them. The life form called El clearly didn't have a specific form. Like a gust of wind, he appeared under the throne out of thin air. His body was silver gray and translucent. He bent down and bowed deeply. Honorable City Lord, of your two guests, one of them has been staying in the memory room and hasn't come out. The other has entered the dark alleys many times, wantonly harvesting spiritual force. According to my observations, I'm afraid he has already begun to show signs of addiction. Oh, addiction? You're certain? Moloch's eyes shot out a trace of light. Very certain. He clearly doesn't understand the drawbacks of absorbing and releasing large amounts of spiritual force in a short period of time. I believe that before long, he'll be like those other fellows and become a chess piece under your control. Al replied with an extremely certain tone. Very good. Then what about Byron? Moloch followed up with another question. This time, Al shook his head regretfully. I'm extremely sorry. After Lord Byron received the news you sent him, he disappeared without a trace. No one knows where he went. The only thing we know is that he is secretly planning something. Disappeared? Moloch's pupils suddenly contracted when he heard this. One of his hands tightly gripped the armrest. After a full 2 to 3 minutes, he rubbed his chin and muttered to himself, Damn it, that fellow wouldn't really be crazy enough to carry out his crazy plan, right? Plan? What plan? Al curiously raised his head. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. This is not something you should know. Forget it. Is there any other important news? Moloch didn't seem to want to continue the conversation and decisively changed the topic. I don't think so. No, there seems to be one more thing. Last time, after returning from the dark alley area, one of your guests brought back a companion. According to my observations, their spiritual powers are very similar, and it can even be said that they have almost merged into one. I've never seen two independent consciousnesses with such high compatibility in my life. Perhaps you should pay attention to this. It sounded very interesting. Go. Tell them that I have something important to discuss with them. Now, isn't it too obvious? Idiot. Do you think I still need to pretend? As you wish. Simple. Violent. Direct. There wasn't much euphemism or concealment. The spiritual world was like the most direct reflection of one's heart. So there was almost no need to worry too much when doing things. Especially for the strong, they only needed to give orders directly. The weak could only obediently follow orders or be devoured and destroyed. It was obvious that Zhang Cheng and the initiator couldn't defeat a city lord in a direct confrontation, so they had no right to refuse. After a while, they appeared in front of the giant. You're the newcomer? If I'm not wrong, you should be from the same place as them, right? Moloch stared meaningfully at Zhang Cheng. He didn't know why, but he felt an unprecedented threat from this guy who seemed to be countless times weaker than himself. Yes, Your Excellency. Zhang Cheng courteously put one hand on his chest and bowed. Interesting. Can you tell me, other than you, how many other fellows from the so-called material universe are there? Moloch continued to probe as he looked up and down, trying to find out what was making him feel uneasy. Unfortunately, such actions were futile. Unless he tore apart Zhang Cheng's body, he would never be able to find the organ that was cut from the Overlord's corpse. Zhang Cheng, who had always been sensitive, quickly sensed the unusual scrutiny and replied with a smile. As far as I know, there might be about 3 more. But don't worry, they're a bunch of complete losers who don't even have the courage to challenge the unknown. Trash like them, even if they survive, are destined to be rejected by the entire world. They don't pose any threat at all. From your tone, it seems like they were all defeated by you. Moloch changed his sitting position and used one of his hands to lightly tap on the armrest, trying to increase the psychological pressure in this way. Zhang Cheng shook his head non-committally. You can say that, but you can also say that I didn't. Because the one who really defeated them wasn't me, but themselves in this spiritual world. All I did was open up a passage and chase them from the other side. You open up a passage? Then what about this passage? Moloch suddenly became spirited and leaned forward slightly. I don't know. Maybe it's still there. Maybe it's no longer there. Even I can't confirm the location of that place. If you're interested, you can consider arresting those losers. If they were really rejected by the world, their minds will inevitably carry traces of corruption. And this corruption can help you locate that connection point. Zhang Cheng explained half-truthfully. Of course, from a certain point of view, his theory was correct. But what about the real situation? If Moloch really found that connection point, what awaited him would be disappearance and eternal death. Unfortunately, Moloch didn't realize the danger of this matter and impatiently continued to ask, "Then how can I find those fellows?" It's very simple. I just happen to have some things that they left behind. I believe that with your strength, it shouldn't be difficult to find them. And if you need, I can provide some additional help, as long as you are willing to provide some knowledge and information. Chapter 12:27. Greed, lust, and temptation were always important and indispensable factors that led to destruction and death. Because without these strong impulses, no living being would easily lose their rationality. Just like if there was no hunger and no need to eat to survive, a wild beast would not risk its life to hunt, knowing full well that it could be injured or even killed in the process. But unfortunately, this assumption could never exist. After all, it was impossible to have no desires, be it in theory or reality. If there was no desire, then life would have no motivation to live and would choose death instead of struggling to live in pain. As a lunatic who had a deep understanding of the nature of desire, Zhang Cheng was undoubtedly very good at observing the true desire in a person's heart and using this desire to achieve his own unspeakable goals. With just a few words, he had successfully piqued the interest of the giant-sized city lord in front of him. Although he did not know why the other party was interested in the connection point between the material universe and the spiritual world, he was certain that one thing was certain. But one thing was certain, and that was the power that the other party grasped was far from being able to resist the intense impact of matter and energy. Moreover, he would not be willing to give up his enormous spiritual force and willingly head to the material universe with his weak physical body. Are you sure that guy will be fooled? After walking out of the lower palace of the obelisk and returning to the memory room, the initiator stopped and probed with an uncertain tone. Why not? Think about his eyes. Do you think it's a lie or a disguise? No, it's not. It's a strong desire from the bottom of his heart. Trust me, this kind of thing can't be faked. Zhang Cheng gave a straightforward answer, but the initiator was obviously doubtful. He frowned and questioned, why? Why would he be interested in the connection point? Why would he be interested in the material universe? I'm sorry, but you should ask him about that, and not me. Things like desire are often difficult to judge with reason. For example, some gods who have surpassed the limits of mortals will still be obsessed with their lovers or friendships when they were still mortals and are willing to pay a great price to carefully maintain it. From a rational point of view, you can't explain why he would want to do this. That's right. This is desire. Although it could be rational, Most of the time, it is irrational. Zhang Cheng shrugged and explained. This was because desire itself was born from a certain primitive instinct in the genes and then slowly evolved into impulsive behavior. It was just like being angry, and throwing a tantrum. Everyone knew that these actions would only make the situation worse, but when it came to it, not many people could endure it. He had always believed that nothing in the world could escape the control of desire. If the universe itself had an independent consciousness, then there must be some kind of desire. You think that Morlock's actions are irrational? The initiator hesitated for a moment, as if he did not quite agree with this point of view. Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. No, don't try to use our way of thinking to infer his behavior. Don't forget, this is a spiritual world. How many intelligent life forms have you seen that can be called normal? You mean, his way of thinking and habits might be very different from what we observe on the surface? A strange light flashed in the initiator's eyes. That's right. There's a saying in my hometown, what you see may not be true. It means that what you observe with your eyes is often the most deceptive. Think about it. If Morlock is really as normal as he looks, how could he create such a sickly city? The vague order, the lawless dark alleys, and the vampire-like methods of stealing spiritual energy from the residents. Everything hinted at the values in his heart that were diametrically opposite to ours. So I dare to bet that his next actions will be far beyond our scope of understanding. As he said this, the corners of Zhang Cheng's mouth rose slightly, as if he was waiting for something to happen. To be more precise, he began to develop an unprecedented interest in toying with his opponent's mind. No matter what, Morlock was a very representative figure in the spiritual world, and he also stood at a considerable height. As long as one could study his values, way of thinking, and the desires hidden in the depths of his heart, it was equivalent to understanding the commonalities of the higher life forms in this world. And understanding the commonalities meant that one could play some tricks using the smallest price to obtain the greatest benefits. Inciting opposition, hatred, and creating chaos and war was as easy as eating and drinking for him. Moreover, he had brought the heart of the tree of chaos, a creation with unlimited potential. Then, can you tell me your plan? The initiator keenly sensed the darkness and evil in the surrounding air, and he cracked a playful smile. Of course. Who asked us to be allies? But before that, I need to borrow your old friend's mind to solve a small problem. With that, Zhang Cheng looked at the man who had been reading all kinds of memories. The latter raised his head and held his chin, asking with interest, "What is it?" "It's a problem about the dominance of mind, matter, and energy. Suppose I want to open a connection point to the physical universe. Theoretically, a large amount of matter and energy will surge in an instant, causing a violent impact on mind power, right? My question is, at this point in time, which one will dominate for a short period of time?" Zhang Cheng did not try to hide anything and openly raised the problem that had been bothering him. Even though he had personally experienced the extremely chaotic state, he did not stay for long for safety reasons, and he did not dare to carry out any dangerous tests inside. God knew what kind of serious consequences would occur if some uncertain factors were added in the chaotic and conflicting space. A very good question. You're lucky this happens to be one of the topics I've been studying. Although I can't give you an accurate and definite answer, I can share some of my conclusions and guesses. The man with the glasses showed a rare excitement. That's right, it was excitement. There was even a hint of madness in his eyes. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1228. What do you think is the most essential difference between the spiritual world and the physical universe that we were born in? After a brief silence, the bespectacled man took the lead and threw out a complicated question. There was no doubt that he was used to this kind of answer with a certain guiding mode, because this method was the most conducive for another person to understand a large number of abstract concepts in their own way. Zhang Cheng touched his chin and pondered for a moment before he immediately tried to answer. I once came into contact with something called psychic ability in a parallel universe. It's very similar to the power used in the spiritual world. But the only difference is that this kind of power emphasizes the self, which is absolute idealism. Anyone who uses this kind of power must tear apart their complicated human nature and establish at least a secondary personality that is completely opposite to the main personality. Then, they use the collision of the two thoughts and ideologies to strengthen themselves. In my opinion, whether it's the spiritual world or the physical universe, they actually have a considerable amount of each other's shadow. Therefore, I feel that there's no essential difference between the two. Ha ha ha! Interesting point of view. Although it's very different from my speculation, at least you came to this conclusion through independent thinking. This alone is worthy of praise. The man laughed and praised. Then what's your speculation? Zhang Cheng subconsciously glanced at the initiator beside him and found that the other party also had a look of surprise on his face. It was very obvious that he didn't know when his old friend had done research in this area. The bespectacled man did not waste any time. He stood up and opened his arms, creating a miniaturized model of the material universe out of thin air, including space, dimensions, and extremely complicated parallel spaces. From afar, it looked like figs that were plucked open, and the innumerable celestial bodies were the fruits. They were divided by something called a membrane. Each area divided by a membrane was equivalent to a relatively independent box. All the life forms living in the three-dimensional universe, including Earth, observe the world inside the box. As for the high-dimensional life forms standing outside the box, they just stood outside the box and looked down at the low-dimensional life forms inside with a condescending gaze. Their attitudes were cold and merciless, and they had neither malicious nor kind intentions. After creating all this, the man obviously used up a lot of mental strength and looked a little weak and tired. He opened his arms and pointed at the huge model and said, "As you can see, this is the physical universe we were born in. In the old era, scientists on Earth had always mistakenly believed that the birth of the universe came from a Big Bang. Of course, this can't be said to be completely wrong because what they could observe was only a part of the three-dimensional universe, not even the parallel universe. So, coming to this conclusion wasn't worth making a fuss about. Our home planet Earth, no matter which parallel universe it was indeed born from a Big Bang. But the problem is that if you jump out of the three-dimensional universe and look at it from a higher perspective, you'll find that there's no so-called birth time of the universe. It existed from the very beginning. Wait, you mean there is neither birth nor destruction in the material universe?" Zhang Cheng interrupted with a frown. "That's right. At the very least, before the sovereigns began to interfere, the entire physical universe was in a state of balance and infinite cycles. It's like a ring. There's no beginning and no end." The man with glasses nodded gently. "What about the current situation? If my perception is correct, there seems to be a huge problem with the cycle of the physical universe. It's barely holding on and not collapsing. What's going on?" Zhang Cheng put forward a different opinion. He had always believed that everything had a beginning and an end. Even the universe couldn't escape the fate of death. It was just that this span of time was very long, so long that even the dominion of the universe, who was almost eternal, couldn't reach the end. Haha, this is the key point that we're going to talk about next. As he spoke, the man raised his left hand and added a white circle to the outside of the model. Do you see it? This is the spiritual world we're in right now. According to my observations, all the positions where the connection points can be opened are all in the physical universe. Or rather, they're all near this circular belt. So, the spiritual world can't be a curved sphere covering the periphery of the physical universe, nor can it be the core located in the center. It's free from the physical universe, but it has a certain connection, so the possibility of it being the circular belt is the highest. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but that white world actually has a limit to its width. Using the distribution of the cities as a reference, you'll easily notice that they're all in a straight line next to each other. There are never two that are side by side. In other words, every city radiates an area that's equal to its length and width. Just based on this bit of evidence, that's too arbitrary. Zhangqing's tone was doubtful. After all, he wasn't the kind of person who would easily trust others, especially when it came to understanding the unknown world. He wouldn't casually accept another person's point of view, even if that person seemed smarter, more intelligent, and more creative than him. Don't rush. Listen to me patiently. The man gestured for him to calm down. I've opened 4 connection points before, and also did some less dangerous experiments at close range. As a result, I found a very interesting pattern. The closer to the border area, the weaker the spiritual power and the stronger the physical influence. Once again, I successfully reached the border of the circular belt. Guess what I found? What? Zhang Cheng asked cooperatively. The next second, the man excitedly replied loudly, "It's a deep blue ocean, an ocean completely formed by unknown energy. It's endless. It's it that separates the physical universe from the spiritual world. It's also it that's using a very strange method to transmit what's needed between them. An ocean formed by unknown energy?" Zhang Cheng's pupils suddenly contracted. Obviously, he was shocked by the news. Yes, I can't use words to describe that feeling of being huge and containing everything. Believe me, all words and vocabulary can't describe that feeling. If you're interested, I can take you to take a look. Then you'll realize how great the research we're risking our lives for is. It's great enough to surpass everything. So, don't worry about small problems like who's the dominant one. Instead, set your sights further and study that blue energy ocean. It's the future and the ultimate hope. Chapter 1229. As a person who had long forgotten what trust was, Zhangqing naturally would not believe the other party's one-sided words. Therefore, after receiving the shocking news, he immediately abandoned his original plan and embarked on the path to the edge of the spiritual world alone. This was because he needed to confirm if the huge blue ocean really existed and why it separated the two universes. Was it man-made, or was it naturally formed? Before he figured everything out, he did not have a mind to care about anything else. After briefly responding to Governor Moloch's warm invitation, Zhangqing quickly left the city. With the help of an instrument that was used to detect the density of spirit and matter, he quickly moved in a direction. Along the way, he did not even pay attention to the strangely shaped creatures that took the initiative to attack. Instead, he left them far behind. Just like that, he did not sleep or rest until the mental power stored in his body was almost exhausted. Only then did he see the flickering dark blue light on the distant horizon. Oh my God, this is unbelievable. Admiring the extremely active matter in the surrounding environment, Zhangqing finally understood what the man with the glasses meant when he said that this was the future and the final hope. At the same time, he also removed the factor of man-made from his suspicions. After all, an energy ocean of this level could not be created by anyone out of thin air. There must be countless coincidences in its formation. Even if there was a mistake in one of them, it was impossible to form such a fault in the boundary between matter and spirit. There was no hesitation. Zhangqing ran to the border like a madman and looked down at the unknown energy jumping in the dark blue ocean. At this moment, he once again felt how insignificant he was. Power. Limitless power. This was the ultimate goal that was worth paying any price for. Out of strong curiosity, greed, and desire, Zhangqing bent down and carefully scooped up a bit of the light blue energy water. In an instant, the water quickly evaporated like alcohol and formed a dazzling blue light spot around him. However, there was still a very small part that slowly seeped into his body in another form. After a while, a cold feeling began to spread from the inside to every corner of his body. Cold. Very, very cold. It was so cold that even his soul was about to freeze. He could not move. He could not think. He could not even feel the existence of the outside world. Fortunately, the feeling of despair soon disappeared, and he regained consciousness again. As he moved his slightly stiff body, he muttered to himself, "What was that just now? A special cold energy attribute? No, it wasn't the cold. Instead, it was stagnation. Everything, both mental and physical, fell into a temporary standstill. In other words, this energy could instantly force everything into a stagnant state. The so-called cold is nothing more than a deception of the perceptual system. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure suddenly appeared out of thin air not far away. His whole body was covered in a black robe, and his face could not be seen clearly. However, he praised in a low voice, "Amazing." The first time he came into contact with this dark blue energy, he was able to discover the true secret hidden within it. Stagnation was an unbelievable power. Be it the ruler of the physical universe or the overlord of the spiritual world, they could not escape from this power. In fact, when opening the connection point between the two worlds, what really works is not the pressure of the mind on the matter, nor is it the impact of the matter on the mind. It is the hidden and inconspicuous energy that works. "Who are you?" Zhang Cheng subconsciously tensed up. This was because he had not sensed any form of fluctuation at all. In other words, this mysterious fellow had used a method he had never seen before to teleport him from a distant place. As for whether it was a projection, some kind of remote puppet, or his own body, that was unknown. "Me? I'm the same as you. I came from the physical universe to the spiritual world with a desire to surpass everything. Unfortunately, although I saw the scenery at a higher place, I could not find a path to go up." At this point, the mysterious man deliberately paused for a moment and stretched out a bony right hand that could almost be considered as a skeleton. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Byron. If you were once a ruler, you should have heard of me. Byron, the first ruler. At the same time, the first madman to betray his identity and create the most terrifying disaster in the universe." Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise, his eyes flashing with a strange light. If one were to rank all the sovereigns that have been born in the material universe from the highest to the lowest, Byron would easily sweep away all of them and take the first place. More than half of the huge problems in the physical universe originated from him opening the connection between the spiritual world and the physical world. It must be known that what he opened was not as simple as a connection point. He had directly used the deaths of more than 6 rulers as the price to tear open a huge hole, causing 1/8 of the universe's celestial bodies to disappear into thin air. Although the surviving rulers tried their best to repair it, unfortunately, they could only barely isolate it. They could not repair it all. Ha! I didn't think that after so long, my name would still be remembered by all the rulers. That feeling is really good. The person who called himself Byron could not help but laugh loudly, a trace of pride in his laughter. Perhaps his principles in life were as described by a saying, "If you couldn't make everyone love you, then making everyone hate you to the core was also a good choice." At the very least, no matter how much time had passed, every time his name was mentioned, there would still be many people loudly cursing or even cursing him. After all, in the eyes of some madmen, death was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was being forgotten. If their name or symbol could be remembered forever, they would be willing to do anything. "So, the disaster you created was to enter the spiritual world?" Zhang Cheng asked with interest. Byron nodded happily. "That's right. Back then, it wasn't like now where there was so much information to learn from. Back then, I wasn't even sure if the spiritual world existed. I only vaguely felt some kind of weak calling. For an uncertain possibility, you almost destroyed the physical universe? Why not? You should be able to see that I hate eternity, and even more so, I hate to carry out my bullshit duties. What I want is change, to surpass, to constantly advance, and explore the unknown." Chapter 1230. Selfish, crazy, paranoid. He was absolutely self-centered. Zhang Cheng could see far too many similarities between himself and the first sovereign. Even the darkness in his heart was exactly the same. Perhaps the only difference was that the time he spent looking down from a high vantage point was too short. He couldn't be as unscrupulous as Byron, doing whatever he wanted without considering the consequences. Of course, from a certain point of view, this was also an advantage. At the very least, Byron had already paid the price for his reckless actions, and it had been an extremely bitter price. Think about it. A lunatic who hated eternity and immutability was trapped in a place with no way to leave. What kind of torture would that be? After realizing this point, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but sympathize with Byron. With a smile, he asked, "Then how did you endure it? Or rather, how did you resist the restless desire to destroy and slaughter in your heart?" "Oh, you can feel it." Byron's tone revealed a strong sense of astonishment. One had to know that under the baptism of time, he had long buried these impulses deep in his heart. Even his closest servant couldn't pry into the slightest bit of it. But now, not only had he been seen through by someone he'd met for the first time, but his tone was also so certain. "Yes, I can feel it, because if I were trapped in a place, dully observing the immutable things around me, I would also go crazy, and completely crazy at that. In comparison, it's already not easy for you to maintain your rationality on the surface. Also, I'm a little curious. How did you endure it?" Zhang Cheng carefully probed Byron's reaction. He wasn't too sure if the Byron he was observing was deliberately faking it, or if he could really control his emotions that should have gone berserk. "Endure it? No, I didn't endure it. I was venting all the time. Do you know? In the spiritual world, you don't need to hide your innermost desires. It's best to do whatever you want. Often, the more you do this, the faster your spiritual power will grow. Just a few minutes before I came here, I had just destroyed a city and slaughtered millions of lives just to hear their screams and wails before they died. Because this was the only way I could relax myself. Do you still think I'm normal?" As he spoke, Byron removed his black hood, revealing a frightening skeletal face. There was no meat. It was as if the bones were wrapped in dried skin. His eyes had long dried up. Only the dehydrated lenses were still embedded in his eye sockets, flashing with an abnormal dark cold light. If not for the weak beating heart in his chest and the small amount of blood flowing through his veins, no one would raise any objections, even if he was a lich or some kind of undead creature. Zhang Cheng simply couldn't imagine what a person had to go through to turn himself into this ghastly appearance. After a full minute of silence, he smiled bitterly and sighed. "All right, I was wrong. You've already gone crazy, haven't you?" What he saw at this moment was nothing more than a momentary sense of satisfaction after a frenzied release. "Speak. Why did you suddenly appear in front of me? What do you want to do?" "My goal is very simple, and that is to cooperate with you. From you, I see the possibility of surpassing the limits and breaking this damned cage." For some unknown reason, Byron's expression suddenly became dangerous. He was like a volcano that was about to erupt, and his emotions were extremely unstable. "Then what about my other two allies?" Zhang Cheng undoubtedly sensed this as well. He immediately took 2 steps back, keeping himself close to the deep blue ocean behind him. If there was any excessive action, he would definitely extract a large amount of energy and pour it into the other party's body. "Allies? Are you talking about those 2 fellows who are playing games with Moloch? Ignore them. Believe me, Moloch isn't someone easy to deal with. He's one of the very few who knows the secrets of the material universe." Byron grinned, revealing a row of black teeth covered in filth. "Then do you know why he's looking for the connection point between the material universe and the spiritual world?" Zhang Cheng clearly didn't have the slightest interest in the safety of the initiator and his friends. He only cared about things that interested him. As for whether the so-called allies could survive in the end, that would depend on their ability and luck. Byron understood the cold expression on Zhang Cheng's face, replying meaningfully, "Of course it's to obtain the power to break the shackles. Don't tell me you haven't noticed? All the cities in the spiritual world were established after my appearance. It was me who taught them how to evade the attacks of the overlords. It was also me who taught them how to establish order and rules. Before my arrival, this place was actually a wasteland. There were only beast-like battles. But afterwards, a portion of life forms with high intelligence gradually evolved. With your intelligence, it shouldn't be hard to understand what's going on. So that's how it is." Zhang Cheng nodded thoughtfully. "Everything that seems to be cut off from the primitive environment was created by you. You even made those city lords mistakenly believe that they could obtain power from the material universe through the connection point. You're very smart. Can you guess what I'm trying to do?" Byron asked excitedly. It's nothing more than two things. Zhang Cheng directly stretched out his right index finger and middle finger. First, to borrow their power to find out if there are any intruders from the material universe. Second, to let them try to open a passage and see if they can return to the material universe. But according to your personality, the possibility of the former is much higher. Uh-huh. You actually guessed correctly? Yes. I've always been paying attention to see if there are any overlords chasing after my footsteps. But regrettably, those who are willing to take huge risks to explore the unknown are in the minority. So far, only 3 overlords have come to the spiritual world. Of course, I'm talking about before your arrival. What about them now? Dead. They're all dead. What I need is a genius. A genius with the hope of breaking through the barrier. Not a bunch of idiots who only knew how to be obedient. They've disappointed me, so there's no need for them to continue living. What if I disappoint you too? No, you won't. I believe you'll be able to find the answer I want. But I said if. I said it before. There are no ifs. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1231. Without a doubt, it was absolutely impossible to discuss the probability of failure with a seriously paranoid and mentally abnormal fellow. Because in the minds of these fellows, they simply didn't believe that they would make mistakes and that all their failures were caused by others. When dealing with such fellows, words were absolutely the most pale and powerless thing. Only by using overwhelming power could they understand how childish and laughable their thoughts and actions were. But regrettably, Zhang Cheng didn't feel that he could teach this original ruler a lesson that would leave a deep impression. He simply shut his mouth and gave up on the idea of trying to make him recover his reason. He was very clear that before suffering a major setback and failure, these people would never reflect and wouldn't feel that there was anything wrong with them. Seeing that Zhang Cheng didn't mention the word if, a faint smile appeared on Byron's withered face. He said with a slightly proud tone, "Since you already know your mission, I don't need to emphasize what you should do next, right? Of course. I will uncover all the secrets hidden after we parted, as well as the connection between matter and spirit." Very good. It seems that you have clearly understood your mission. As a gift, I will give you all the information I have gathered. Remember, you don't have much time. After losing what little patience you have left, I don't know what crazy actions I will take. Is this considered a threat? No, I'm only stating a fact. As the last word left his mouth, Byron's body began to gradually dissipate, scattering like dust in the azure energy sea. Feeling the subtle changes in his surroundings, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but sneer as he muttered to himself, "Crazy? Believe me, you have never seen what true darkness and madness is. You're only a spoiled child. If you don't have the support of a powerful force, you won't even survive an hour." Very clearly, Byron's threatening words made him feel that they were extremely childish and laughable. Because who would willingly give up everything to come to the spirit world from the material universe? Who would fear death? In fact, everyone who came here was prepared for the worst, and that was to be trapped here forever or die here. But interestingly, Byron, who came here first, didn't understand this logic at all. Perhaps he had never thought that he would fail, nor did he realize that he would actually die. That was why he rashly set off the most terrifying disaster in the recorded history of the material universe. To sum it up in one sentence, because of ignorance, so fearlessness. The birth of the sovereigns in the physical universe gave Byron too much confidence and the right to be arrogant. In fact, in the very beginning, the sovereigns who were born later knelt at his feet like servants, obeying his orders and listening to his teachings. There was no doubt. There was no challenge. There was no competition. In such an environment, any intelligent life would involuntarily become arrogant and complacent. They would even subconsciously form the illusion that they were the supreme ruler of the entire universe. Firstborn sovereign Byron. Very soon, I will make you understand that only by clearly recognizing your own insignificance and inferiority will you have the qualifications to surpass that final boundary. After saying that, Zhang Cheng took a deep breath and used what little mental strength he had left to create an oval bottle. He filled the bottle full of dark blue seawater and went back the way he came. At the same time, a drama of conspiracy and betrayal was unfolding in the interior of the obelisk in the western part of the city. "How is it? Have you found the fellows I asked you to look for?" City Lord Morlock asked as he lightly tapped on the armrest of his chair. "Of course. Please take a look. This is the area where they've been active recently." The initiator didn't say anything else and directly projected the accurate information he'd obtained from his investigation. It had to be known that in the spiritual world, locating a few people who were cursed and rejected didn't require much effort at all. As long as he found the slightest bit of similar aura, he could quickly confirm the target's location. What was even more frightening was that the rejected sovereigns would constantly attract nearby monsters. Thus, wherever they appeared, there would often be intense battles. Morlock obviously knew this and immediately nodded in satisfaction. "Well done. Tell me, what do you think we should do next to capture all of them?" "I think it's best if you release a bait. In the eyes of these fellows, there's nothing more important than revenge. Once they find out where their enemy is, they'll definitely charge over regardless of the consequences, even if they know it's a trap." The initiator didn't hesitate to give his suggestion. However, he didn't say that he'd actually already contacted the sovereigns in private and swindled their trust. This was actually a trap within a trap within a trap. Whether it was Morlock or the sovereigns who desperately wanted to kill Zhang Cheng, they were all chess pieces that he could manipulate and play with. Oh, temptation. The corners of Morlock's lips curled up slightly, revealing a thought-provoking expression. Roughly 2 to 3 minutes later, he instructed one of his servants, "From now on, you're the bait." "Understood. I'm the bait." The servant hurriedly prostrated himself on the ground. The next second, his body rapidly changed, and in the blink of an eye, he became exactly the same as Zhang Cheng. Whether it was his appearance, aura, or voice, there were no flaws at all. The pupils of the initiators standing at the side suddenly shrank when they saw this scene. Their eyes flickered with disbelief. After all, in the world of consciousness, subjective consciousness represented the entire existence of a life form. Normally speaking, it was basically impossible for a life form to perfectly disguise itself as another life form. This was because whether it was the way of thinking or the strong subjective consciousness and beliefs, there would be strong deviations in minute areas. Only those life forms that had no subjective consciousness or even a sense of self could do this. But without a sense of self, in the world of consciousness, there was no life. To a certain extent, this was a paradox. But now, this thing that was absolutely impossible and shouldn't exist actually existed. "Haha, you seem very surprised, aren't you?" Morlock laughed as he stood up, looking down at the initiator from above. At this moment, he was like a massive shadow that loomed over the initiator's head. Chapter 1232. Shouldn't I be surprised? The initiator stared at the servant who had just completed his transformation, his eyes glinting with vigilance. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed that the other him standing beside him was actually a servant in disguise. Apart from that, he didn't understand why the other party would suddenly display such power, or rather, skill in public. If he had such a servant, he definitely wouldn't let anyone know. Instead, he would carefully hide it and wait until the crucial moment to give the enemy a huge surprise. However, Morlock obviously didn't think so. He replied with a slightly disdainful tone. "You should be surprised. After all, until now, you still haven't figured out what true power is in our world." True power? When the initiator heard this, he subconsciously had a bad premonition. However, before he could react, he felt that the space around him had suddenly produced an extremely viscous, unknown liquid, and this liquid was gradually solidifying. In the end, his hands, legs, and all parts of his body below his neck lost the ability to move. Without a doubt, all these changes originated from the huge giant on the throne. How is it? Do you feel the power? The kind of power that can change and influence everything with just a thought, Morlock said as he walked down the steps. Every step he took was like stepping on the heart, quickly producing an intense, and irresistible resonance. Thump, thump, thump. Accompanied by an indescribable heavy pressure, the initiator finally couldn't maintain his composure. He narrowed his eyes and asked loudly, "What are you trying to do?" "Ha ha, I should be the one asking you this question. What are you trying to do? Don't think that I don't know what you and your two companions are doing in private. The reason I didn't expose you was because I thought that you were still useful. However, now that I've gotten what I want, you have lost your value." Morlock's laughter carried a hint of mockery. "I don't understand what you mean." "You don't understand?" "No, you understand. You're just pretending not to understand, trying to fight for a chance of survival. Don't worry, I don't intend to kill you, at least not for now. On the contrary, I need your eyes to witness something." "Witness?" "Yes, witness. I, the great Moloch, am about to become the first existence to surpass the limits. I will break the barrier and conquer the physical universe first, and then the spiritual world." As he spoke, Morlock opened his arms wide, his face filled with excitement and fanaticism. At this moment, he had completely lost the calmness and rationality that he had displayed before. He was like a lunatic who had lost control of himself. "So that's how it is. He was right. This is your true appearance." The initiator recalled what Zhang Cheng had said before and immediately understood what he meant by abnormal. In the spiritual world, most living beings obeyed their desires and instincts. To put it bluntly, if they were hungry, they would hunt and eat. If they were tired, they would find a relatively safe place to rest. If they liked something, they would do everything they could to get it. If they hated something, they would do everything in their power to kill it. In short, they would not try to hide their inner thoughts, nor would they follow the example of the intelligent life in the material universe and suppress their emotions. However, Moloch was clearly an anomaly. Not only had he learned how to conceal and deceive, he also knew how to use his enemies to achieve his own ambitions and goals. Just as this city lord, who had a gigantic body, was about to open his mouth and say something, a translucent servant with no fixed form suddenly descended from the sky and shouted in a hurried tone, "Master, not good. That fellow who has always been in the memory room has disappeared." "What? What do you mean he's disappeared?" Moloch's originally proud expression immediately disappeared, replaced by confusion and anger. I don't know. He just disappeared into thin air." The servant was clearly frightened, and he bent down and trembled as he explained. "Trash. You can't even keep an eye on one person. What value do you have left? Go to hell." The furious Moloch completely revealed his tyrannical nature. He grabbed the servant and crushed him, turning him into spiritual energy that filled the sky. After doing all this, he turned around and stared at the immobile initiator. With a sinister expression, he asked, "Tell me, where did your accomplice go?" "Do you think I'll tell you?" The initiator smiled playfully. No one knew better than him how good his old friend was at avoiding danger and hiding. Once it disappeared from sight, it would be impossible for a second person to find it unless the person was willing to do so. As for Zhang Cheng, who had left earlier, he wasn't someone anyone could deal with. As long as his two allies weren't caught, he didn't have to worry about his own safety. "I'm sorry, but it seems like you don't have a choice. Either you give me an answer now, or you give me an answer after you've tasted pain worse than death. Do you think you can withstand the torture of your mind and soul?" Morlock extended a finger and made a grasping motion on the initiator's chest out of thin air. In the next second, a heart-wrenching scream echoed in the hall, and it didn't stop for a long time. When the despairing pain finally disappeared, Moloch asked with a sinister smile, "How does it feel? How long do you think you can last?" Trust me, I can last much longer than you think. The word surrender has been forgotten a long time ago. Show me what you've got. You'll see how indestructible my will is." The initiator raised his head, and a bright light flashed through his eyes. Pain, torture, despair. He had experienced these things countless times when he was still immortal. He didn't care about going through it again. In any case, he knew that Moloch wouldn't kill him so easily. At the very least, he wouldn't do something so impulsive and stupid before he found the rulers rejected by the spiritual world. Moreover, He didn't think his old friend would just watch all of this happen. At a critical moment, he would use his wisdom to turn the situation around or even overturn it. Chapter 12:33. Passing through the endless white plain, Zhangqing finally left the blue ocean at the edge of the spiritual world. Just as he followed the guidance of the instrument in his hand and planned to return to the city and hide in the dark alleys to slowly study the information, a familiar figure suddenly stumbled out of the spatial rift out of thin air and fell to the ground with a plop. "It's you." Zhangqing was obviously shocked. The newcomer was none other than the initiator's closest friend and companion, the man who always wore glasses. His face was no longer as calm and composed as usual, and his spiritual power was overdrawn to the point where he could barely support his consciousness. He replied with a bitter smile, "Of course it's me. Who else could have found you if not me? Sorry, but I have bad news. We seem to be in big trouble." "Big trouble? Could it be?" Zhangqing subconsciously looked around and realized that the initiator, who had always been inseparable, was not with his friend. He instantly realized what had happened. After all, Byron had warned him before that Moloch was not as harmless as he seemed, especially when it came to the secrets of the material universe. No matter who knew about it, they would not let it go easily. You guessed right. For some reason, that guy suddenly turned hostile and made a move against me. Without any warning, I managed to escape alone with great difficulty. Even now, I still don't understand what his motives and reasons are. While saying this, the bespectacled man rubbed his eyebrows, looking as if he had exhausted his mental strength. But this was not surprising. For someone like him who is used to thinking logically and meticulously, it would be strange if he could understand a mentally ill person who was abnormal from the inside out. After understanding the situation, Zhangqing could not help but explain with a smile, "Motives and reasons? I think you still don't understand how different life forms that struggle to survive in the spiritual world from birth are from you and me, who come from the material world and grow up in a rational and civilized society. They do things without considering any logic or reasons. Their motives are often very simple. They either don't like you or they think you're in the wrong." So Moloch suddenly made a move because he found out about our little tricks? The man with glasses had an astonished expression on his face. "That's right. However, we can't rule out the possibility that he feels that you have lost your value." Zhangqing nodded slightly. Due to his absence during this period of time, he did not know how far the initiators had advanced the plan. If the city lord had truly obtained the territory of the sovereigns who had been rejected by the world, then it was completely reasonable for him to make a move. Damn it, no wonder. He should have been in the Hall of the Obelisk at that time. He gave the information that was marked as an area of activity on the surface, but was actually a trap to Morlock, the man exclaimed in realization. Obviously, even in his dreams, he didn't dare to believe that because of such an insignificant and even laughable reason, the other party would brazenly tear up the agreement and completely disregard the generous rewards that they might receive in the future. Ignorant? Stupid? Short-sighted? The bespectacled man didn't know what words to use to describe his mood at the moment, let alone how to describe Morlock's sudden change in attitude. No matter what, this fellow had actually used brute force to directly tear apart the trap he had painstakingly set up. If this was called stupid, then what was the person who set up the trap considered? This was like an extremely intelligent person try to trick an idiot. In the end, before the intelligent person could complete a series of complicated arrangements, he was thrown to the ground by the idiot with a wooden stick. No matter how good his brain was, he would still fall to the wooden stick in the end. "Oh, you're saying, you, who have played with schemes and tricks all your life, actually fell to the hands of a psychopath. Ha ha ha. Sorry, I'm not mocking you. It's just that this is too funny." Zhangqing couldn't help but hold his forehead and laugh out loud. He could almost imagine what kind of expression the initiators would have when they found out the truth. Burning with anger? Ashamed? Or a strong sense of defeat? No matter which it was, it would create a huge shadow in their hearts. Perhaps it wouldn't be a big deal in the short term, but as time passed, it would slowly settle down and become a flaw. At that time, The initiator would no longer be a perfect person who had no flaws from the inside out. Enough. The bespectacled man shouted loudly. If you want to laugh, I don't mind letting you laugh here all day. But right now, we have to think of a way to save him. Don't forget, we are allies. If Moloch really gets what he wants, no matter if it's you or me, it'll be a huge threat. Sorry, this is a mistake you made. It has nothing to do with me. I won't risk my life for someone else's mistake, whether it's an ally or a stranger. Finally, please keep in mind that he and I are destined to be enemies. Only when one of us disappears forever can the other be at ease. So no matter what rescue plan you have, it's best to eliminate me from it now. After saying these cold and ruthless words, Zhang Cheng didn't even look at the other side, continuing to advance in the direction of the city. He was very clear that Moloch's ambition couldn't be realized, because from the beginning, the information about the material universe was full of all kinds of errors. Even if the passage was successfully opened, the only thing they would get would be death. Compared to Moloch, this idiot who was kept in the dark from the beginning, Byron was the real threat. Even if his mental state was that of a willful child, the knowledge and information in his memories were real. Think about it. Was it safer for a rational adult to wield a terrifying weapon of mass destruction, or was it more dangerous for a child who didn't care about the consequences to wield one? Anyone with a bit of brain would choose the latter. Zhang Cheng didn't know that if Byron's last thread of rationality snapped, it would cause enormous damage to this world, as well as the material universe. In particular, the blue ocean's power was enough to stop everything. If it spread between the two worlds, the results would inevitably be destructive. In comparison, the black hole, a celestial body that many civilizations viewed as a disaster, was as harmless as a kindergarten child. He was very clear that he didn't have much time left. He had to race against time to find a way to deal with this madman before he went crazy. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1234. Matter, ability, as well as the mind controlling them. What kind of power could make these three come to a complete standstill? What is this deep blue liquid? Ever since he separated from the bespectacled man, Zhang Cheng silently returned to the dark alleys of the city. He began to concentrate on researching the information he had obtained, as well as the bottle of deep blue seawater he had brought back. Due to the mysterious ability of stagnation, this deep blue liquid was more difficult to observe and understand than anything else. To be precise, it was completely impossible to observe, let alone perform any corresponding tests. The reason was very simple. The so-called observation was in fact the use of tools and special methods. Through matter, energy, or even spiritual force, the fluctuations produced to the outside world, one could finally conclude a series of laws. But the problem now was that this liquid flickering with deep blue radiance would make anything that came in contact with it enter a state of stagnation. This also meant that no matter what method was used, it would be impossible to observe what was inside. Even this deep blue light could be a type of visual or spiritual illusion. After all, light was also a type of energy. Normally speaking, emitting light meant that the inside was receiving and reflecting photons, but Zhang Cheng had never found any traces of photon activity. Without a doubt, he had no way of dealing with this unknown liquid. His research had unwittingly reached a dead end. In contrast, the information he had obtained from Byron's hands recorded the process of many crazy experiments, as well as the final results. It must be known that the crazy Byron was capable of doing anything. He had even treated the entire spiritual world as a huge testing ground. Regardless of whether it was those cities that had sprung up from the ground, or the large amount of higher life forms that had awakened intelligence, they were all part of his crazy experiments. Of course, this was only on the surface. Secretly, he had once taken the risk of being killed and poured this deep blue liquid into the body of an overlord. If the records weren't exaggerated, then this hegemon should have directly turned into a walking corpse without the slightest bit of resistance. Even now, he was still displayed on the roof of Byron's palace, as a display of his might and power. That's right. When this madman was still very weak, he had personally killed an overlord that stood at the top of the spiritual world's food chain. From a certain perspective, he was the most dangerous person in this world. Damn it, what should I do to figure out the nature of these liquids? After countless failed attempts, Zhang Cheng's patience was finally about to run out. He rubbed his heart in annoyance. To be honest, he had never dreamed that one day he would encounter something that he could not do anything about. It was impossible to observe, unable to test. Even more so, they couldn't conduct any real experiments. Even staying within 100 meters of the substance would have the risk of becoming a walking corpse. Fortunately, although Zhang Cheng was sometimes a little crazy, he never went into a dead end. After realizing that he would not be able to get any results from studying this thing for the time being, he immediately erased all of the records and information. He quietly left the dark alley area and came to the front of the obelisk located in the center of the city. According to the information he received some time ago, Morlock had successfully captured the sovereigns rejected by the spiritual world 2 days ago. Now, he was planning to open a connection point to the physical universe, attempting to use the theory Byron had instilled in them, the limit between the spiritual and physical. It had to be said that in the pursuit of great power and eternal immortality, all life forms were the same. Unfortunately, Morlock did not know that everything he had done was in fact nothing more than an experiment of the mastermind behind the scenes. Over the long years, there had been many city lords like him who had used various methods to open a connection point, but in the end, not a single one was lucky enough to successfully enter the physical universe. Yes, success rate was 0. It could be said that there were more than 75 cases recorded in the information, which was basically equivalent to a death-seeking competition. There were unlucky people who were torn to pieces after being impacted by powerful matter and energy, and there were also those who discovered that their spiritual power was rapidly declining when they were about to reach the other side. In extreme panic, they lost control of their bodies and failed to condense into a life form that belonged to the physical world. In the end, they disappeared without a trace. In comparison, the sovereigns who came from the physical universe to the spiritual world were usually able to survive as long as they were not too attached to their original power and status. Sensing the restless spiritual power fluctuations in the obelisk, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips slightly and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Then let me add a little something to this plan that is destined to fail. Let's see if I can find any loopholes in it, or get some new inspiration." As soon as he finished speaking, he carefully took out a bottle filled with dark blue liquid and went directly to the top of the obelisk, pouring half the bottle of liquid into the gap. At the same time, in the hall inside the obelisk, Morlock was sitting on the throne, watching the servants work nervously and busily. On his right, the initiator, who had been tortured to the point of hallucinations, was drooping his head in exhaustion. He used this moment of peace to recover his spiritual power and ensure that he would not have a mental breakdown in the next round of torture. As for the sovereigns who had been captured, they were all nailed to rods made of unknown metals and placed in a strange shape in the middle of the hall. This was especially so for the vague feeling of being suppressed and rejected by the entire world. Everyone who felt this could not help but feel sad for their fates. This was because being rejected meant that they would not be able to obtain power from their surroundings, and they would not be able to devour spiritual power. On the contrary, they obtained power from the hatred and anger of their prey before they died. The more they absorbed, the more they would be rejected by the world. When they reached a certain limit, they would be crushed alive by the power of the entire world, completely destroyed from their spirit to their body. It could be said that they were destined to die from the moment they were born. It was only a matter of time. After an unknown amount of time, when the decorations in the hall were nearing completion, Morlock finally stood up impatiently and ordered his servants, "Don't waste time. Hurry up and start." But master, we haven't checked yet," a servant cautiously reminded him. "There's no need to check. I can feel that there are no problems with your decorations." With that, Morlock stood up and strode to the empty space in the middle of the hall. He lifted his foot and stomped hard. Chapter 1235. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening explosion, the ground beneath their feet and even the entire city began to tremble violently. Fortunately, Most of the houses in the spiritual world were constructed out of mental energy. Thus, despite the intense shaking, none of the buildings collapsed. However, every intelligent life form in the city could clearly sense a terrifying energy permeating the air above the city. Within a few seconds, the enormous black obelisk flickered with a blinding light. It was like a gigantic pillar of light, radiating an abundant amount of mental energy into the surroundings. This energy was so terrifying and shocking that it far surpassed the sum of everyone's energy combined. At this moment, everyone finally realized how terrifying the power of the city lord, who had been collecting exorbitant taxes for a long time, had accumulated. Strip. Morlock clearly did not care about the reactions of the outside world at all. He was completely focused on guiding this energy that had been accumulated over a long period of time. At his command, the strange pattern beneath his feet suddenly began to creak. Immediately after, the largest circular symbol on the ground began to rapidly spin like a circular gear, connecting with the other patterns around it. Light and shadow constantly alternated. At the same time, large amounts of mental energy, matter, and energy mixed together, gradually forming an enormous and extremely dangerous vortex. No, you can't do this. Damned lunatic. Let us go. I curse you. When the rulers at the edge of the vortex saw this scene, their expressions changed drastically. They either loudly begged for mercy or cursed out loud. They were not idiots. Their minds were filled with large amounts of knowledge and wisdom that had been accumulated over time. They knew that something terrifying was about to happen. Unfortunately, no one cared about their cries of defeat. Not long after, a few servants pushed the metal pillar into the center of the vortex, allowing the vortex, which was sharper than any weapon, to tear apart the rulers' bodies, minds, and souls bit by bit. Under the tearing of the terrifying energy, they disappeared in a short while, leaving behind large amounts of residue that had been rejected by the world in the center of the vortex. Strip is complete, Master. Master! A servant bowed and reported respectfully. Very good. Now it's time to build a stable coordinate point. And then, before Moloch could finish his words, he heard a loud explosion from outside. The next second, boom, the 30-meter-tall heavy metal door was directly blown to pieces by the astonishing force. One of the pieces spun at an extremely fast speed, brushing past his cheek and embedding itself into the wall behind him. It even left a wound that was half a finger deep on his face. I'm sorry. I seem to be late, don't I? Accompanied by a familiar voice, a man slowly walked in from outside and gently adjusted his glasses. Ha ha ha. No, you're just in time. Seeing the true face of a newcomer, the initiator, who had remained silent all this time, finally laughed out loud. This was because he saw that his old friend did not come alone at all. Behind him was a group of obviously man-made life forms, each of them carrying a large number of weapons of different shapes. Some of them clearly had the style of energy weapons in the material world, but the original matter and energy were converted into mental strength. There were also some designs that he couldn't understand at all, but judging from the strange devices hanging on their chests, he was 80% sure that they were suicidal attacks that would take the enemy down with them. As his closest friend, the initiator knew all too well about his old friend's talent in the field of war weapons. A long, long time ago, before the Earth in the parallel universe where the initiator lived was occupied by a huge fleet, the initiator had once invented an energy weapon that almost destroyed the enemy's flagship. One had to know that in terms of the accumulation of knowledge and technology, the two sides were almost worlds apart. It was almost like the gap between the space age and the stone age. Even so, the initiator was still able to create miracles. Later on, as the initiator came into contact with more and more things and stood at a higher position, his old friend began to no longer be satisfied with just creating weapons. His goal shifted to studying the nature of a universe. However, from these messy modified life forms, the initiator vaguely saw the genius who was known as the smartest brain. Not bad, you're still alive. I finally made it in time. The bespectacled man glanced at the exhausted initiator, and the tense expression on his face finally relaxed a little. However, his act of barging in had undoubtedly angered the city lord, Morlock. The latter stuck out his tongue and licked the cut on his face. He roared angrily, "Bastard! How dare you disturb this great moment? I'll kill you! I'll kill you! I'll tear your body and soul apart." In an instant, he grabbed a metal pillar and injected a huge amount of spiritual energy into it. Then, he threw it with all his strength. One had to know that this was not an ordinary metal pillar, nor was it a pure physical attack. In the process of flying, the surface of the metal pillar was covered with a layer of shocking silver energy. The man with glasses seemed to know how powerful it was. He had no intention of going up to meet it. Instead, he gave a look to a creature with a strange device hanging on its chest. The creature understood tacitly. His eyes shone with the determination to face death as he rushed toward the metal pillar. The moment the pillar collided with the strange device, the entire hall was covered by a blinding light. A huge amount of spiritual energy and matter splashed out like a tide, destroying everything around it without restraint. Other than the huge vortex, there was basically nothing that could withstand such destruction. After the splashing was over, Morlock found that the surface of his huge body was densely covered with tens of thousands of tiny wounds. Moreover, the wounds would occasionally sting and itch. Out of a subconscious reaction, he scratched them lightly with his hand. As a result, large pieces of flesh fell off as if they were rotten. In some places, even the bones inside were exposed. "Bastard, what did you do to me?" Morlock questioned loudly in shock and anger. Although the body was far less important to a being in the spiritual world than in the material world, it could be completely abandoned and rebuilt. However, this action would undoubtedly consume a huge amount of spiritual energy. For him, who was about to open the connection point, it was definitely not something that could be easily consumed. "What did I do?" "I just added a little something to your body. In this world, all matter and energy are controlled by the mind. So I suddenly thought, if I can interfere with your mind, what will happen to your body?" A dangerous smile appeared on the bespectacled man's face. Chapter 1236. Interference. "Damn it, you've been to that place." Moloch's huge pupils visibly contracted, and his entire being became abnormally alert. He didn't even wait for his body to completely collapse before he abandoned it at the first possible moment, and then used his stored spiritual power to create a new one. Of course, the price was that close to a third of his spiritual power was completely depleted. After all, the body was an important carrier that carried the spirit and subjective consciousness. No matter whether they were willing or not, no life in this world would casually create a weak body. On the contrary, they would do everything they could to strengthen their body, and even use close to half of their spiritual power to maintain a strong body. Otherwise, once it was shattered by the enemy and their subjective consciousness was directly exposed, it wouldn't be as simple as just an injury. Seeing the enemy's spiritual power rapidly decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye, a faint smile appeared on the bespectacled man's face, and he nodded meaningfully. "That's right. I've been to that place, and I even brought back a bit of dark blue liquid from somewhere. Unfortunately, I was too cautious at the time and didn't dare to bring too much. Otherwise, just now, you'd already be a statue at the mercy of others. Bastard, you don't even know what you're doing, do you? That kind of power isn't something you can control. It's too dangerous, dangerous enough to threaten the entire world." Moloch stared at the slowly collapsing body, and his face showed undisguised fear. He clearly recognized the mysterious liquid in the dark blue ocean, and he was even more aware of the effects and destruction that this liquid could cause. In the short few minutes they were talking, the flesh, organs, and bones scattered on the ground all turned into jelly, and finally slowly condensed into a large lump. "Ah, I know it's danger better than you. Unfortunately, you don't seem to have given us the right to choose. I believe you should know that we don't care what this world will become. We just want to find the answer. So when we lose the right to choose, we will do very crazy things." The bespectacled man opened his mouth, revealing a crazy and twisted expression. It was just unknown whether this madness came from the heart, or if it was just a pretense to gain an advantage for the following intimidation and negotiation. Without a doubt, Moloch didn't dare to gamble on whether the device in the chest of the modified life form carried the dark blue liquid. After hesitating for a while, he still chose to back down and asked carefully, "What do you want?" "Very simple. Let my friend go." The bespectacled man was quite smart. He knew that he couldn't be complacent at this time, so he straightforwardly put forward a condition that the other party couldn't refuse. The initiator was no longer of much value at the moment. Even if he handed it over, it wouldn't affect the other party's plans. Enough is enough. This was his way of survival and negotiation. Compared to his ambitious partner, he didn't have such strong personal desires. Otherwise, he wouldn't have shared all of his research results. Sure, although Moloch's face was filled with anger and unwillingness, he still decided to compromise. He carefully walked around the solidified object on the ground and tore the initiator off the metal pillar. He threw the initiator on the cold floor like a piece of trash. "Take him with you. Get out of my city. Don't ever come back." "As you wish." The man bent down and pretended to bow respectfully. Then, he ordered the two modified life forms to lift the initiator up and slowly left the main hall of the obelisk, disappearing at the end of the alley. But what was interesting was that he didn't take his subordinates away and left them in the hall. Nobody knew if he did it on purpose or not. Provocation? Threat? Moloch wasn't sure what the other party was planning. He stood there without moving, staring at the sealed devices on his chest. About half an hour later, the modified life forms fell to the ground as if they were under their control, losing their ability to move. "Quick, go take apart those devices and see what's inside." Moloch decisively ordered his servants. However, when the devices were completely dismantled one by one, his furious roar once again reverberated in the hall. "And no, 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 despicable trash. How dare he?" It turned out that other than the first device that had exploded, the rest were all empty shells. There was nothing inside. In other words, the bespectacled man had used psychological tactics and intelligence to fool him from beginning to end. Humiliation. Utter humiliation. The irascible Moloch waved his thick arms and tore the abandoned modified life forms into pieces. He allowed his spiritual energy to scatter in the air, forming small pieces of beautiful light. Because he was too angry, he didn't notice that some dark blue liquid flowed through the cracks in the roof and quickly flowed into the large whirlpool. When he was done venting, he turned around and stuck one of his hands into the center of the whirlpool. He shouted with a pained expression, "Open, open for me, the material universe. You'll be the witness of me breaking the limit, and you'll also be the first target to be conquered." Along with his hoarse roar, surging spiritual energy was continuously injected into the whirlpool. The whirlpool's rotation speed also became faster and faster. Finally, boom! A violent impact was released from the center of the whirlpool, spreading directly to the entire city. Nothing could remain unharmed in the face of such terrifying destruction. In the blink of an eye, the entire city was swallowed by the gushing energy and matter. Not only did all the residents die, but the city itself also turned into countless particles under the impact. Not a single trace of energy was left behind. At the center of the impact, Moloch, who had lost an arm, stared with wide eyes at the dark space on the other side of the whirlpool. He opened his mouth and muttered to himself, I succeeded. The material universe is on the other side." Driven by strong curiosity, he reached out with his other hand, trying to touch the darkness that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. But before he could touch it, he suddenly realized that his legs couldn't move. To be precise, he had lost all feeling in his legs. He looked down. A large amount of dark blue liquid had already corroded his calves and was spreading rapidly throughout his body. Wherever it passed, whether it was muscles, cells, blood vessels, or spiritual energy, without exception, all fell into a terrifying stagnation. Chapter 12:37. Who did this? Realizing that he had been ambushed, Moloch immediately raised his head and scanned the surroundings. because at this time, if he gave up on the body that he had just rebuilt, it meant that his originally powerful strength would be weakened to an extremely dangerous degree. Therefore, he wanted to find the enemy hiding in the dark before his body was completely eroded. Then, he would decide what to do next. But unfortunately, no one responded. There was only silence. Whether it was the servants or the originally noisy city, they no longer existed at this moment, leaving only empty darkness. Damn it, Morlock was not a fool. He knew that this was the enemy trying to stall for time, waiting for him to be unable to hold on first. He gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. As someone who had personally seen the dark blue sea and the terrifying power of the unknown liquid, he was very clear that there was nothing that could stop this thing from corroding. Looking at the hard block of flesh on the ground and the ground around the hard block that was slowly being corroded, he knew that unless the dark blue liquid was diluted to a negligible degree, this change would only slow down with time and would not truly stop. Perhaps after a long period of precipitation, the space within 100 kilometers with a hard block as the center would be completely frozen and become a forbidden area. The man wearing glasses used such a small amount to produce such a terrifying result. Then this liquid that was at least 100 times more and still maintained a considerable amount of activity definitely had the ability to turn him into a lifelike living statue in a few minutes. Thinking of this, Morlock's face became even more gloomy, his eyes flashing with the light of struggle. In the end, the strong desire to live won over reason. He once again abandoned a body, using the remaining spiritual power to create a shell that was only 1/10 the size of the original. When he opened his eyes again, he suddenly found a familiar figure in front of him out of thin air. "Hello, honorable city lord. It is an honor to meet you again." Zhang Cheng bowed elegantly. "It's you." Morlock's heart suddenly twitched. Never in his dreams did he think that this guy that he had always ignored would give him a fatal blow at the last moment. Zhang Cheng smiled and nodded. "That's right, it's me. I think you must be very curious. Why did I, a guy who disappeared for a long time, come back again, right? Why did you come back? Why do you want to oppose me? If I'm not wrong, you shouldn't be on the same side as those two fellows." Morlock suppressed the raging anger in his heart and asked, You're right. I'm not on the same side as them. To a certain extent, we are still enemies. In fact, I'm not interested in what you've done, nor do I care what you've done to your two so-called allies. I'm here today to do a small experiment, and you're the best test subject." As he spoke, Zhang Cheng's lips curled up slightly, revealing an evil smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. He could even feel that even in this spiritual world, the power of darkness was still rising in his body. Experiment. Morlock subconsciously clenched his fists. If his mental power had not been continuously weakened, he would have launched his fiercest attack long ago to tear the enemy in front of him into pieces. Unfortunately, at this moment, he could only enjoy it in his mind. He didn't dare to put into action. This was because he didn't know how much of the dark blue liquid his opponent had on him, or if he would suddenly throw it out in the middle of a battle. Yes, experiment. Zhang Cheng purposely pretended not to see his opponent's hostility and explained, "Since you've seen the dark blue ocean at the edge of the world, you should be clear about the characteristics of this liquid. No matter what comes into contact with it, it will be forced into a stagnant state, also known as a frozen state. Anything that comes into contact with it, whether it's matter, energy, spirit, or soul, has no chance of escaping. Get to the point." Morlock urged impatiently. For some reason, he had a strong sense of uneasiness, as if something terrifying was about to happen. "Don't rush. Let me finish." Zhang Cheng raised his hand and gestured for him to calm down. Due to the stagnant property, any ability or instrument can't observe the slightest movement inside the liquid. I had to give up on direct observation and decided to summarize my experience through some external contact. "So you chose me." Morlock was obviously enraged. He began to push away the abnormality around the whirlpool with his enormous spiritual power. He couldn't imagine that one day, someone as powerful as him would treat him as a soft persimmon. Zhang Cheng undoubtedly sensed his anger. He reminded him with a faint smile, "If I were you, I wouldn't act rashly at this time. Take a good look at your feet, and then look at the open connection point. Then you'll understand what I'm doing." "Bastard, you threw the liquid into the connection point." Morlock was so shocked that his voice trembled when he saw the liquid in the center of the whirlpool spreading out at an extremely fast speed. This kind of action could no longer be described as crazy. While the two were talking, part of the liquid had begun to affect the physical universe. At least half of the small galaxy had been frozen. Whether it was the visible matter or the invisible matter, without exception, all of them were in a state of absolute stagnation. Gravity, electromagnetic force, weak GN force, strong GN force, everything had disappeared. Similarly, on the other side of the spiritual world, the giant whirlpool that was rotating at a high speed also stopped. The entire connection point seemed to have been completely swallowed by darkness. There was neither sound nor light. Unbelievable. I didn't expect that such a small amount of dark blue liquid could have such an amazing effect. Most importantly, I finally understand what the so-called stagnant property is all about. Zhang Cheng didn't care about Morlock's criticism at all. He wrapped his finger with his spiritual power and cautiously approached the stagnant area. In less than a second, his spiritual power broke away from the control of his subjective consciousness and condensed into small pieces. It was like being peeled off. That's right. It was peeling off. It was a peeling off that was independent of any consciousness and was not under any control. It was so incredible that words couldn't describe it. Chapter 1238. "What are you doing?" Moloch sensed the small movement and carefully maintained a safe distance from her. If he was surrounded by a large amount of dark blue liquid, he would never stay in such a dangerous place for a second longer. Zhang Cheng glanced at him and replied meaningfully, "Nothing, I just found something interesting." Interesting? He didn't know why, but when Morlock heard this word, he suddenly had a bad premonition. "That's right." Zhang Cheng nodded seriously. "Do you see this small piece of stagnant spiritual energy fragment? Do you know why it became like this? And why it didn't dissipate after leaving the control of the subjective consciousness?" You know, Morlock frowned subconsciously. From his expression, it was obvious that he didn't believe a single word. But it was no wonder. In the spiritual world, no one knew what the endless dark blue ocean meant, and no one knew what the dangerous seawater could do. The only thing they knew was that this mysterious thing would cause permanent and irreparable damage to the target and the surrounding environment. Any area that was eroded would become a forbidden area without exception. Even a powerful overlord would not get close to the forbidden area's area of influence. Of course I don't know. But from my observation just now, I have a new guess and idea. Do you know? Normally, spiritual energy can't exist without consciousness. When a life is killed in this world, its spiritual energy will temporarily exist in the air in the form of energy for a short period of time, but it will dissipate after a while. But now, this small piece of spiritual energy fragment has left my control and existed in an independent state for at least 5 minutes. Do you know what this means? Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with excitement and anticipation and asked with a half-smile. It means stagnation can allow spiritual energy to be preserved forever. Morlock's tone was full of uncertainty. At this point, he had temporarily controlled the anger and impulsiveness in his heart, and no longer looked like he wanted to eat someone. On the contrary, he was trying to figure out what the other party found from the liquid. Idiot. Of course not. The stagnation you saw, or the phenomenon of freezing, is actually the result of a forceful stripping. These liquids stripped the energy from under my control. Presumably, the stagnation of other matter and energy should be similar to the stripping of spiritual power. No matter what it was, once it came into contact with the liquid, it would be forcefully stripped away, leaving it in a pure state. Look at the first body you abandoned. The remnant spiritual energy and matter have already started to separate. As he spoke, Zhang Cheng turned his gaze to the frozen lump. It was different from the situation where all kinds of blood, organs, bones, and skin were mixed together. Now, it was divided into 3 distinct groups. Among them, the colorless and transparent blob was the frozen spiritual power, and the dark red blob was the remains of the corpse. As for the last part that was in a semi-liquid and semi-gaseous state, it was the aggregation of energy. Although there were still many parts that had not been separated, it was enough to explain the nature of the dark blue seawater. It allowed the things in the dormitory to exist in an absolutely independent and pure state. What was even more interesting was that if the target of the corrosion was a life form that retained its subjective consciousness, then it would exist as an independent entity after being frozen. At the same time, this life form would enter a state of immortality. Even if it was cut into 8 pieces, it would not truly die. Of course, Zhang Cheng would not tell anyone about this, because he could already see the dark blue liquid dripping down from the cracks. At this moment, it was falling from a high altitude at an extremely fast speed. Drip, drip, drip. 3 drops in a row accurately hit Moloch's huge head. The ice-cold touch caused him to quickly wake up, and he cursed in anger. Bastard, you want to kill me? Kill you? No, I only plan to use you to complete the last step of the experiment. Give up struggling. Actually, you were originally an unexpected product, a test subject that Byron used to test various possibilities. Rather than die in his impossible deception, it would be better to contribute to the exploration of the unknown. Don't worry, after I succeed, I will erect a statue for you, so that everyone who sees it will know of your greatness. While saying this, Zhang Cheng did not hide his evil and dark nature at all, and his mouth cracked open to reveal a crazy smile. Without a doubt, he was very clear that Moloch did not have enough mental strength to create a new body. If he dared to do so, it meant that he would become a fish on the chopping board. But if he did not give up his body, the dark blue liquid's power would turn him into a living statue. Byron? You know Byron? This name seemed to have some kind of magic, causing Moloch to become abnormally irritable. Zhang Cheng nodded slightly. Yes, we met not long ago. I'm afraid you don't know that he was actually the original ruler of the material universe. He grasped unimaginable forbidden knowledge and power, and created a great disaster that almost destroyed the entire world. Including you, all the intelligent life forms, cities, and methods to resist the overlords were deliberately spread by him. Perhaps I'm not too clear on what he told you, but I can guarantee that it was all lies and deceit. No, you're lying. Byron would never lie to me. Moloch roared angrily. Oh, why? Can you tell me the reason? Zhang Cheng was not in a hurry to refute, and instead asked with great interest. As a relatively sensitive person, he could feel that the things Byron did in this world were definitely not ordinary. Just his name alone had already been elevated to some kind of symbolic symbol. After all, Byron was the first person to bring wisdom to this barbaric and ignorant world. And at the same time, he was the first person to ignite the flames of civilization. If not for his appearance, there would not be any so-called intelligent life forms in the spiritual world, and there would not be any cities. All creatures followed their primitive desires and instincts, killing and plundering each other, staggering forward on a path full of thorns. They would either ascend to the peak of evolution or fall down and become nourishment for the victors. Regrettably, this kind of noble behavior that should have been praised, or even praised, actually stemmed from the darkest and most evil of motives.